Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of April Tinsley. April Tinsley was born on March 18, 1980, in Fort Wayne, Indiana, the oldest child in her family. She attended elementary school and was a member of the children's choir at her local church. April enjoyed playing with her friends around the neighborhood. On Friday, April 1, 1988, when she turned 8, April came home from school, eager to play. After lunch, she asked her mother if she could visit her friend Nicole, who lived just a few hundred yards away. Her mother agreed, as their neighborhood was very safe. Before April left, her mother reminded her to call Nicole as soon as she got to her house and gave her an umbrella, as it was nearly 3 p.m. and rain was expected. A few minutes later, when she arrived at Nicole's house, April called her mother. Her mother told her to be home by 4 p.m. When that time passed, April still hadn't returned, causing her mother to worry that she might have gotten caught in the rain. She called Nicole's house to check on her. Nicole's mother answered and said that April and Nicole had gone to a nearby playground. It started to rain, and April realized that she had left her umbrella at Nicole's house. She told Nicole that she would go back to Nicole's house to get her umbrella, and then come home, since she had promised her mother that she would come home when it started to rain. April returned home first, while Nicole went to another friend's house to play, and the two girls parted ways. When April's mother did not see her daughter return, she called Nicole's mother to ask about the situation, and Nicole's mother told her. April had not come to pick up her umbrella, even though she had left the playground nearly an hour earlier. April's mother was worried, and she informed her husband that their daughter was missing. They both went out to look for April, and some neighbors joined them when they heard about April's disappearance. They searched all the streets connecting Nicole's house, the playground, and their house, but they found no sign of her. Finally, her parents decided to contact the police. The police came to their house, investigated April's information, and began the search. Within hours, many neighbors had joined together to help the Tinsley family search for April, searching the area along the route she often took, but found no sign of her. As night fell, the police began to fear that she might have been kidnapped, believing they would have found her if she had simply gotten lost. It seemed as if she had disappeared completely. The next day, the search area was expanded and news of April's disappearance spread throughout the city. Even with more police and volunteers involved, they still found no trace of her or any clues. April had been missing for 3 days, until April 4th, when a man went jogging about 20 miles from April's home. While running through some fields, he saw a human body lying in a ditch. Alarmed, he called 911 to report the incident. Police quickly arrived at the scene and identified the body as April Tinsley. She was fully clothed, except for one shoe, which was missing. Although officers did not see any obvious signs of trauma, police suspected that April had been murdered. They believed that the perpetrator may have killed her elsewhere and then left her body in the ditch. Near the body, police also discovered an adult toy, but they were unsure if it was related to the case. They later found April's missing shoe across the street. The autopsy results showed that April died of asphyxiation and sexual assault. They estimated that her death occurred within 2 days before her body was discovered, indicating that the perpetrator had kept her alive for some time. The police collected DNA from the body, but at that time, the FBI did not have a DNA database, and DNA analysis was not yet developed. Therefore, the police had to focus on finding new clues. After the body was found, the police appealed to the public through the media to receive more information about the case. 2 important clues emerged. A man contacted police to report that he had driven past the field where April's body was found and had noticed an old blue pickup truck parked on the side of the road. Police thought the truck might have belonged to the killer, and that witnesses might have seen it when the suspect dumped April's body. the second clue was even more important. A woman who lived along the road from the playground to Nicole's house claimed that she had seen a girl who looked like April on the day she went missing. A second witness reported that as April walked down the street, an old blue pickup truck stopped next to her. Moments later, the truck drove away with her. The vehicle blocked the witnesses' view, making it impossible for them to see how the girl got into the truck. The witness also described the driver as a white man, about 30 years old, with blonde hair. Police have created a sketch of the suspect and shared it with the media, hoping that someone will identify him. The FBI soon joined the investigation. Together with the police, they looked into the possible involvement of all the men who had previously been convicted of sex crimes living in April's area and tried to find new leads. The police then received a tip that the suspect's profile matched that of a man who had been involved in some organized crime and had joined Satanism. The police checked him out but found no connection to April's case. However, the police arrested him for another crime. The police continued to follow up on other leads, but they made no progress. This went on for months and eventually, the police hit a dead end. During the investigation into April's murder, police uncovered several other crimes against children and arrested several suspects, but they were unable to identify April's killer. For many years, there were no significant updates on the case. However, in May 1990, a breakthrough occurred. A boy, who lived about 10 miles from where April's body was found, discovered a note on his shed. The note appeared to be from the killer, who confessed to killing April and hinted that more killings might occur in the future. The author of the note also asked if police had found April's second shoe. This led police to suspect that the person who wrote the note was indeed April's killer. At that time, the media had not reported that the April's shoe was found several hundred yards from her body, meaning only the killer would know this information. Another interesting detail is that the message was originally written in pencil and then outlined in marker. This led police to believe that the perpetrator may have left the message months ago and then returned to make it more visible by sketching it. Police decided to release a photo of the message in the hopes that someone would recognize the handwriting, but this effort yielded no leads. A few months later, Fort Wayne residents were shocked to hear that police had discovered the body of a 7-year-old girl in another part of the city. She had been sexually assaulted and died of asphyxiation. Because of the alarming similarities to April's case, police suspected that the same killer was responsible for both murders. However, FBI analysts believed that the two cases involved two different perpetrators. No progress was made in either case until 1995, when it was confirmed that the second murder was committed by a deceased family friend. As a result, the case was closed and police no longer linked it to April's murder. Police are also awaiting new messages from the killer. His original message said he enjoyed taunting police. Years passed without any new evidence. However, in 2004, the situation changed dramatically. A girl from Fort Wayne discovered a Ziploc plastic bag in her bicycle basket containing a terrifying note. She immediately gave it to her parents, who then contacted the police. The note read, "Hello, honey, I've been watching you. I'm the one who kidnapped, assaulted, and murdered April Tinsley. I have a gift for you. You will be my next victim if you don't call the police and if I don't see this note on the local news tomorrow. I will destroy your house, kill everyone but you. You will be mine." Police were certain that the author of the note was April's killer. Along with the note, they found the used condom, which was sent for laboratory analysis. By 2004, DNA testing was commonly used, and experts had already developed a DNA profile from the semen found on April's body. The analysis revealed that the DNA from the condom matched this profile, but the suspect was not listed in the FBI database. The police reopened April's case and soon received a report about a second note. Another girl had discovered a plastic bag containing a similar message. The note stated that the writer had killed April Tinsley and threatened to kill her as well. Inside the bag was another used condom, which also contained the DNA of the same man. In the following months, police received 2 more reports of similar notes found by other girls. In these cases, the perpetrator included Polaroid photos of his genitals. Police examined the images for clues to identify the suspect. But they only found a green patterned bed sheet in the background, which was on the killer's bed. They searched for stores that sold similar bedding, but this effort did not yield any leads. Over the course of a few months, the perpetrator left for notes, but then he suddenly stopped communicating for years. In 2009, the FBI released a profile of the killer based on eyewitness descriptions of his appearance, hoping to generate new leads. However, this did not help the Fort Wayne police. The case remained a top priority for a number of reasons. Most importantly, they wanted to bring justice to April and hold the killer accountable. The killer also taunted the police with his text messages, confident that he would never be caught. He even threatened other girls and left his DNA for the police to find. Police collected numerous biological samples over the years, but April's killer was never matched to the FBI database. This means he had not been arrested for serious crimes and was still at large. In 2012, April's case was featured on a popular television show about unsolved cases, but with no new leads, the case went cold again. In 2015, police reopened the investigation and contacted Parabon, a company that provides creative services to law enforcement. Experts there create portraits based on DNA samples, and this approach has helped solve several cases. Police contacted Parabon, who created a portrait of the suspect in the case in April. The portrait was posted online and shared with the media in the hope that someone would recognize the person. Unfortunately, they did not receive any useful leads. However, the police were determined to continue their investigation. In 2018, they contacted Parabon again, this time to use a new method called genetic genealogy. Experts will take a DNA sample and search public genetic databases to find potential relatives of the DNA sample owner, even if they are distant relatives. They often find thousands of people, then research their family tree and identify someone who fits the criteria of the perpetrator, such as gender, age, place of residence at the time of the crime. The special thing about this method is that the DNA owner does not need to be in any stored database. This method identifies through relatives. The police investigating April's case sent the killer's DNA sample to Parabon again and waited for the results. Tracing the family ties took months as experts analyzed the extensive data. They eventually told police they had narrowed the DNA lineage down to 2 brothers living in Fort Wayne. The police's next step was to find out if one of the brothers was the killer. They tracked both men down and collected their trash, hoping experts could extract DNA samples from it. 30 years after April's death, police found a DNA match between samples taken from April's body and a condom found at the scene, leading police to John Miller, 59. He lived in a small town called Grail, near where April's body was found. He was 29 years old at the time of the murder and lived in a trailer. The police's next step was to take a DNA sample directly from John R. and question him. When police approached his trailer, they informed him that they wanted to ask him some questions at the station. John inquired about the reason for their visit, and one officer asked him to guess. He then replied, "April Tinsley." The police decided to take John to the station for further questioning. During the ride, he chatted comfortably with the police. When they began questioning John, he confessed to kidnapping and killing April. According to John, on the day April disappeared, he deliberately went to Fort Wayne and drove around the streets looking for a girl to kidnap. Finding April on a deserted street, he stopped and told her to get into his car. He said April silently agreed, which the police found strange. However, witnesses did not hear any screams or signs of a struggle, so the police did not rule out the possibility that John convinced April to get into the car willingly. He took her to his trailer, sexually assaulted her, and killed her. He then loaded her body into his pickup truck, drove to the fields, and dumped her in a ditch. He also admitted that the adult toys found at the scene belonged to him. 6 months after his arrest, when John Miller's first trial began, John, on the advice of his attorney, pleaded not guilty. John received a plea deal. The prosecutor initially sought the death penalty, but if John admitted guilt, the sentence would be replaced with a prison sentence. Ultimately, Miller accepted the plea deal, confessed his guilt in court, and was sentenced to 80 years in prison. He will be eligible for parole in 2058, when he will be 99 years old. April's mother, who attended the trial, was disappointed that John was not given the death penalty, but admitted that given his age, the chances of him being released were slim. April's father was unable to attend the trial due to health reasons, but he expressed gratitude to the police for their efforts in finding his daughter's killer. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Liana Friedenbach. Liana Friedenbach was born in São Paulo in May 1987. She grew up in a wealthy family and is the eldest of 2 children. Her father, Henry Friedenbach, is a successful and respected lawyer in the city. Her boyfriend Felipe Café, who comes from the same city, was born in July 1984. However, he was raised in a large family with quite difficult economic conditions. Since childhood, he had to work part-time to support himself and help his family. When the two met while still in school, they gradually developed a friendship and then became the first love of their youth. They had to hide their relationship in every possible way. It is worth noting that Liana's parents were religious and raised their daughter strictly. Liana was educated in religious values and participated in religious activities since she was a child, and her parents did not support romantic relationships when she was young. In addition, social inequality also played an important role. Liana came from a wealthy family, but she chose a man from a poor family. The prohibition of her parents did not make the young people give up on each other, but on the contrary, they decided to hide their relationship and secretly date in private places to avoid detection. In the fall of 2003, Liana and Felipe planned a trip to a remote and deserted land. Before starting the trip, they prepared carefully so as not to be discovered by their families. Felipe informed his parents that he was going camping with his friends, while Liana said that she was going to visit a church with her friends. She thought that this reason was convincing enough for her parents to believe her and agree to let her go without further questions. Liana and Felipe's family believed the story the children had created, so Liana and Felipe could enjoy life without worrying about their families finding out. The two were happy to be able to spend a week together. Liana and Felipe decided to go to Uji Guasu province, which had beautiful scenery. They brought with them essentials such as tents, sleeping bags, personal belongings, and some food supplies. However, financial problems caused difficulties for the young couple. As students, they were entitled to free public transportation, so they made detailed plans to get to their destination by bus. On the early morning of October 31st, Liana and Felipe met at the designated location. They kept the meeting a secret for fear of being discovered. First, they took the first bus, then arrived at another city in the evening. Here, they stayed overnight at the bus station. Then, they continued traveling by 2 more buses to reach their desired destination. They then walked a few kilometers to a secluded spot in the forest, where they planned to make a fire and enjoy some private time together. The weather was warm, with a little sunshine, and although a little tired from the long journey, Liana and Felipe were still happy, joking and planning their vacation. As the couple walked through the forest to the abandoned farm where they planned to stay, they caught the eye of a group of locals near a pond. They were Paulo Cesar de Silva Marquez, nicknamed Pernambuco, and Roberto Alves Cardoso, known as Chino. Chino, 16 years old but already the leader of the gang, thought that there was something valuable in the couple's backpack. The robbers stealthily followed the couple and hid deep in the bushes. While Liana and Felipe set up their tent and had a snack, they were unaware that they were being followed. The robbers waited until they were sure that there were only 2 young men and that they were not carrying weapons. Then Pernambuco and Chino attacked Liana and Felipe. The robbers searched all the bags and backpacks, but found nothing of value. The robbers then decided that they could demand ransom from the couple's relatives. Liana, too scared, immediately said that she came from a wealthy family and that her father would give them as much money as they wanted. The robbers were delighted to hear this information. While the plan to extort money was being finalized, the robbers thought about how much money they could extort. To prevent the couple from escaping, the robbers took them to an abandoned house near the farm, but the house had no windows or doors. They then decided to take the couple to the house of a gang member. When the robbers could not find the way to collect the ransom, they tied up and brutally beat Felipe so that he could not escape or resist. Then all the gang members took turns raping Liana. After torturing the two for a while, the next morning, the robbers took the couple to a secluded place in the forest. The robbers led Felipe, who was seriously injured, deep into the forest. Then, there was a gunshot from deep in the forest. Liana realized what had happened and that her lover was no longer alive. The robbers told her that they had released Felipe and that the robbers wanted to keep her, treating her like a toy until they got bored of her. After their daughter left, Liana's parents soon discovered that she had not gone on a church outing with her friends as she had said. Her parents were also unable to contact her friends to find out where she had gone. Liana's family suspected that their daughter might have run away with her boyfriend and decided to contact his parents. And Felipe's family said that their son had gone camping with his friends. So they had no idea where the couple was. The situation became even more complicated because for several days, no one in the family had been able to contact the couple, and their phones had been turned off. Liana's family reported the incident to the police, who then gradually learned about the couple's route after they left home. Through investigation, the police found the last location where the couple left the bus and moved to a deserted dense forest where their phone was last disconnected in Mbuquasu. A large-scale search began with the participation of the police, rescue workers, and people who knew about the incident who decided to help. A large local businessman also joined the search, using his personal helicopter to search from the air and drop leaflets with pictures of Liana and Felipe. After a short time, the couple's camp was found. However, the atmosphere was very tense because they seemed to have been attacked. There were no signs of blood or fighting, but the couple's personal belongings were thrown around. Their tent had been slashed with a knife from top to bottom. While searching the scene, the rescuers found Felipe's mobile phone. But the most terrifying thing was that they soon discovered Felipe's body. The tied-up man had been shot in the back of the head, at close range. It was clear that the chances of finding Liana alive were slim, but the rescue team and everyone continued to search, hoping that Liana was still alive. Liana's father contacted the press to let everyone know about the incident. A large reward had been announced for any information on Liana's whereabouts, but still no leads. After shooting Felipe dead, the robbers took Liana back to the house where they had previously held them both. Here, the robbers, who had been invited by their accomplices Pernambuco and Chino, joined them. Chino declared that Liana belonged to him, and he could do whatever he wanted with her. He invited everyone to do whatever they wanted with Liana, and his invitation was accepted immediately. The next day, when they learned of the large-scale search operation, the criminals decided to move to another location to cover their tracks. They moved Liana to the house of Anthony Matias de Barros, a member of the gang. That night, The robbers went fishing and Liana went with them. Chino put his coat on Liana because it was cold and he wanted to show her that he cared. To his surprise, Chino's brother also arrived. Chino told his brother that Liana was his lover, and his brother immediately realized that Liana was the one the police were looking for. Chino's brother took Chino aside and warned him that the police were looking for Liana. Chino decided that he had to get rid of Liana. He lied to Liana, telling her that she was free and that he would lead her out into the street. But in reality, Chino led Liana into the woods. There, he brutally murdered Liana with a knife and then smashed her head with a rock to make sure she was dead. Liana's body was found 5 days after the massacre. Liana was wearing the killer's jacket, which later became one of the key pieces of evidence. The robbers managed to flee without destroying the physical evidence. This naive confidence of the robbers helped the police quickly identify them and arrest all the members of the criminal gang. Chino left his jacket on the victim's body, which had traces of his sweat on it. In addition, he took the murder weapon home. He tried to wash the clothes with traces of Liana's blood so that he could continue to wear them. According to the results of DNA analysis, the police identified the members of the gang who tortured Liana. Chino not only did not deny it, but immediately testified, boasting that he had kidnapped, abused, and then killed the unfortunate victim. Chino describes in detail everything that happened to Liana in her final days. After a lengthy trial, most of the adult members of the gang received quite harsh sentences. Pernambuco was sentenced to life in prison for Felipe's murder. Antonio Geno da Silva, as well as Agnaldo Paes, also received life sentences. But Anthony Matias de Barros was sentenced to only 6 years in prison because he himself did not torture Liana but only provided the gang with his house, where everything took place. However, the gang leader, Chino, was only 16 years old at the time of the crime. For this reason, Chino was sent to a specialized juvenile prison with a fairly lenient regime. Chino made several escapes, behaved aggressively and was unpredictable, so he was assigned to undergo psychological testing. Chino was found to have some mental abnormalities, which had terrible consequences, turning him into a sadist and murderer without any feelings of pity or remorse. After being diagnosed as such, Chino was transferred to a medical facility where he underwent mandatory treatment and rehabilitation. No punishment was imposed on him. Chino has a better life than before his crime. He now has his own room with a large TV, internet access, and a comfortable bed with an orthopedic mattress. He is fed 4 balanced meals a day with a customized menu, which is part of the policy of the medical facility where he is detained. Chino's monthly living expenses are estimated at $1,200, which is about $2,500. In recent years, Chino has regularly applied for release, noting that he has undergone all of his treatment and no longer poses any threat to others, which means he can return to his normal life. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of Sabrina Kudder. Sabrina Kudder was born on December 5, 1982, in a suburb of London. She is of French and Algerian descent from her parents. The combination leads to her exceptionalism. The eldest of 4 children, her family moved to Paris when she was 2 years old, and she grew up there. However, Sabrina's complex personality began to emerge when she went to school. Her former classmates described her as fierce, domineering, self-centered. Sabrina does not make friends easily, and she is especially unfriendly to other smart and beautiful girls, as she sees them as competitors. With her beautiful looks and outstanding height, Sabrina could have pursued a modeling career if she had learned to be friendly with others. However, during her childhood and youth, she often wanted to use others instead of caring about their interests. Sabrina participated in sports and music as a child, but she did not strive and did not achieve success in these areas. While studying at school, Sabrina participated in sports and injured her back. Since then, she had to use prescription painkillers. However, she later tried to obtain painkillers illegally, which led to her arrest and warning. Sabrina focused a lot on herself and her appearance, always craving for attention. She believed that she would have a rich, glamorous, and famous future. For a long time, Sabrina's fantasies had kept her from reality. She believed that her rightful place was in Hollywood. Although Sabrina graduated from the Sorbonne with a degree in English and French literature, since 2006 she has changed careers several times in the fashion industry. She has worked as a stylist, makeup artist, and fashion designer, although she has no real expertise in these fields. Sabrina is a young girl with a charming appearance and a hobby of attracting men. However, she only takes advantage of their feelings, never being serious with them. Instead, she is waiting for the perfect man, a prince, who will fulfill everything she wants. After graduating, Sabrina has not yet determined her life goals. She feels entitled to enjoy life without having to make an effort. However, she enrolls in the prestigious Sorbonne University and works part-time at a sweet shop to earn money. At the sweet shop, Sabrina meets Wissam Madouni, a man 6 years older than her. Wissam is a manager at the headquarters of a large French company and is studying at a prestigious university. He aspires to get a master's degree to advance in his career. Wissam loves Sabrina very much and is willing to fulfill all her wishes. Sabrina also found Wissam attractive and saw him as someone she could control. Besides, she also saw Wissam as a ticket to a wealthy life. He was ambitious and had the potential to be very successful in his career, willing to pamper and please Sabrina. The couple began their relationship in 2000 and after a few months decided to move in together. However, Sabrina quickly revealed her true nature by controlling Wissam in every aspect of his life. If Wissam did not meet her demands, she would get angry and even beat Wissam. Sabrina also openly cheated on Wissam without hiding or justifying her actions. She had feelings for many people, including Wissam's close friends, colleagues, and random acquaintances. Although Wissam tried to end the relationship and leave her many times, he could not escape his deep love for Sabrina. In 2001, Wissam earned a master's degree and was promoted, earning him a substantial income. However, Wissam spent the money on luxury goods and entertaining Sabrina. Wissam and Sabrina were compatriots of French-Algerian origin. According to some reports, in the fall of 2001, the couple held a special Muslim ceremony to marry, which was certified by it issued by the Argento Mosque. The couple had a son, but years later, another man named Anthony Francois claimed to be the father of the child. In 2008, the global financial crisis hit hard, causing the company where Wissam worked to go bankrupt and he lost his high-paying job. At this time, Sabrina decided to move to London without discussing it with Wissam. Wissam no longer had any opportunities or hopes for a career here, so he decided to follow Sabrina to London. Upon arriving in London, Wissam found a job at a large bank. However, Sabrina had difficulty finding opportunities in the fashion industry, as she did not have enough skills, experience, and formal education in this field. After that, Sabrina tried many different jobs to find new opportunities. She worked as a nanny, a call center operator, a cafe worker, and even tried her hand at marketing. Sabrina's career journey turned to musician and composer. Despite her best efforts, Sabrina still had difficulty finding opportunities in the music industry. She participated in many auditions and social events to make connections. At one of these events, Sabrina met Mark Walton, a famous musician and composer, who was a member of the famous boy band Boyzone. After leaving the band, Mark became a successful music producer and collaborated with many famous artists such as Jennifer Lopez, Jessica Simpson, and Lady Gaga. In 2016, Mark's net worth exceeded $1 billion. Mark was exactly the person who helped Sabrina enter the world of fame and luxury. She impressed Mark with her beauty and charm. He also had to admit that he fell in love with her at first sight. Their relationship progressed quickly. Sabrina quickly ended her relationship with Wissam. Nothing stands in Sabrina's way. Within weeks, she moved in with Mark in a luxurious house in an upscale area of London. Mark paid all the bills, including rent, for the lavish house Sabrina chose. For months, Sabrina enjoyed the lavish lifestyle she had long desired, socializing with celebrities, attending high society events, wearing high-fashion clothes, and even appearing in magazines. However, when Sabrina became jealous of every woman around Mark and could not control her behavior, Sabrina's true colors began to show. Sabrina became increasingly demanding of extravagant gifts. Mark pampered her with designer clothes, jewelry, and trips to upscale restaurants and clubs, but that wasn't enough for her. The couple's home constantly changed maids, as Sabrina's paranoia led her to believe they were stealing or trying to seduce Mark. Her irrational behavior became too much for Mark to handle. In 2011, he ended the relationship and moved to California, leaving Sabrina penniless. After breaking up with Mark, Sabrina began giving interviews and accusing Mark of being severely abusive and having a habit of substance abuse. She called Mark constantly, crying and begging him to come back. She even threatened suicide, but he did not change his mind. After realizing that she couldn't win Mark back, Sabrina contacted Wissam, who was now a bank executive. He still loved Sabrina and was willing to forgive her after a period of separation. They reunited and continued living together. When Sabrina became pregnant with Wissam's child, she again informed Mark and claimed that the pregnancy was his. Mark, through his lawyer, expressed his desire to support Sabrina and the unborn child. He offered to pay them monthly child support. However, Sabrina did not agree to the amount of monthly child support that Mark paid. Sabrina wanted to double the child support and Mark did not agree. Mark wanted a paternity test after the child was born. Because Sabrina refused to take a paternity test, Mark did not change the child support. Sabrina sued him. Sabrina made false statements on social media and accused Mark of jealous behavior, threatening her and Wissam, accusing him of breaking into their home, attacking Wissam, and sexually assaulting her in unacceptable ways. However, Sabrina could not prove any of her claims because Mark had been in the United States since their separation, which proved he was not present at the scene. When Mark filed a lawsuit and the police threatened to take action against her, Sabrina stopped making those accusations. After the conflict seemed to have been resolved, she spent a lot of time in Wimbledon, southwest London, with Wissam and her 2 children. Sabrina's life was difficult with the housework and the care of 2 children, so Sabrina decided to hire a nanny to help with the housework. She posted a job ad online and personally conducted the interviews. Most of the candidates did not meet her requirements, and those who did meet her expectations did not stay long in her family. A young French woman named Sophie Lionnet answered an advertisement for a babysitter. At the time, Sophie was 19 and was back in her home country of France, so the interview was conducted via video call. Sophie agreed to all the terms. Childcare, housekeeping and cooking for a weekly wage of £50. Sophie was born on January 7, 1996, in the small town of Troyes, between Auxerre and Senators. Her parents, Catherine and Patrick Leon, were laborers, and the family was in dire financial straits. After graduating, Sophie received a degree in childcare, but had no intention of settling down in her hometown. Instead, she longed to move to a big city to develop her career. Although Sophie was quiet, unsociable, and had a plain appearance, she was very kind and open-minded, which made her loved by those who knew her. Sophie's eyesight was poor, forcing her to wear glasses all day. During a conversation, Sabrina quickly realized that Sophie was a simple and inexperienced person, which made Sophie the perfect target for Sabrina to take advantage of. Moreover, Sophie was eager to gain experience, so she was willing to work for minimum wage. Sophie, having told her parents that Sabrina was a serious and trustworthy employer, thought that working for Sabrina's family would be a good start to her nanny career. At first, everything seemed to go smoothly. She took care of the children, did the housework responsibly. This peaceful period lasted for a few months and there seemed to be no serious problems. However, things began to change when Wissam lost his job. At that time, Sabrina's family only had the monthly child support from Mark as their main source of income. So the family faced serious financial difficulties, high rent, and basic living expenses. Sabrina, not wanting to give up her luxurious lifestyle, became irritable and aggressive. She often took her anger out on Sophie, the young nanny. Sabrina and Wissam entered a bakery business with the last of their money, but the venture failed. Sabrina then opened a clothing store but did not have enough funds. She asked Mark for a large sum of money, but was flatly refused, leaving her disappointed. What happened next depends on the source. There are different versions of the story. Some sources claim that Sabrina came up with a plan to use Sophie as a weapon to blackmail Mark. She thought of having Sophie as Mark's accomplice and lover, supposedly planted in Sabrina's home to ruin their lives and endanger the children. Sabrina claimed that the provincial idiot Sophie was in love with Mark. She thought that simply recording Sophie's confession on tape or video and presenting it to the police would be enough evidence to demand compensation from Mark for his cruel actions. However, Sophie refused to lie on camera. Another version, due to her mental disorder, claims that Sabrina actually believed in her conspiracy theory and saw Sophie as an enemy and a threat to her family. She allegedly did not force the nanny to lie but truly believed that Sophie was Mark's accomplice who had infiltrated their family to harm them. Whatever the truth, Sophie's life soon became a living nightmare. Sophie first faced long hours of overwork and inadequate pay. She ended up working from dawn to dusk, with no time for herself, effectively imprisoned within the walls of the house. Next, her pay was cut off completely. To prevent her from escaping or returning to France, Sabrina took her passport, effectively making her a captive. All her contact with her family was tightly controlled. The situation got worse. Sophie was barely fed and was constantly forced to lie about Mark, whom she had never met or known. Sophie was insulted and threatened, accused of stealing money and valuables. She was threatened with imprisonment if she did not comply with Sabrina's demands. When threats no longer worked, Sabrina resorted to more brutal and sophisticated methods. Sophie was moved to a cold basement, fed only meager food. She became thin and weak, however, the cold and hunger were not the worst. She suffered physical abuse, subjected to the most painful torture. Sabrina broke Sophie's nose in a violent outburst. This division made the story clearer and easier to understand, and made the reader feel more comfortable. However, Sabrina's cruelty continued to increase, causing Sophie to suffer daily torture. The basement of the house, located in an affluent area of London, became a place of torture for Sophie, where she had no hope of being rescued. A strange event occurred in the late summer of 2017, when Sabrina took Sophie to the police to say that Sophie was ready to testify against Mark. However, Sophie remained silent. When the police decided to talk to Sophie privately, they took her to a separate apartment. At this point, Sabrina was extremely worried, afraid that Sophie would reveal the horrors that were happening at their home, which would implicate her and her husband. Mysteriously, Sophie chose not to reveal anything or seek help. The police response was also strange. Despite seeing a young woman who was malnourished, frightened and weak, they did not call a doctor or psychologist to ensure her health and safety. At the time, 21-year-old Sophie weighed less than 40 kilograms, had lost some of her hair, was missing a front tooth and was walking with a noticeable limp. However, none of this worried the police, who simply sent everyone home. By mid-September, Sophie made her final phone call to her mother. She confessed to her that she wanted to return home but did not have enough money. Sophie's mother, Catherine, only telling her that she would buy her a ticket and asking her to pack her things immediately. This was the last time Sophie spoke to her mother. On the evening of September 20th, 2017, something unexpected happened at Sabrina's house. A neighbor called the police about a fire in the yard, but what worried them was not the fire, but an unpleasant smell coming from the fire. The smell was similar to that of burnt flesh and hair, combined with something that could not be identified. This stench spread through the air and stuck to the clothes and skin of everyone around. When the firefighters and police arrived at the scene, they put out the fire. However, the homeowner appeared calm and did not know why the police and fire service had visited their home. The police saw what looked like a charred human hand in the ashes. Sabrina and Wissam were immediately arrested and the badly burned remains were removed from the fire. The sex and age of the deceased were unknown, but the body was soon identified as Sophie Lionnet, identified by the melted metal frame embedded in her skull that Sophie always wore. Determining Sophie's cause of death was difficult. Forensic experts found severe injuries to her body, including multiple broken ribs, a broken jaw, and signs of blunt force trauma to her skull and limbs. This suggests that she suffered these injuries while she was alive. Additionally, some of her teeth were missing and her nose was severely damaged, suggesting that she had been severely beaten. The discovery of horrifying videos of abuse inside the house exposed the brutal nature of Sophie's kidnappers. She had been violently attacked in a variety of ways, including with fists, iron wires, golf clubs, and electric shocks. She had also endured humiliation, including being forced to hold her head in a toilet bowl until she suffocated. Experts believe that Sophie may have died of asphyxiation just before being burned at the stake, which would have spared her the terrible pain of being alive while being burned. During the trial, both Sabrina and Wissam denied guilt and showed no remorse for their brutal actions. After the murder, Wissam went to a nearby supermarket to buy fuel to burn the body and cooked dinner for his family, as if the murder had never happened. The couple's first trial began in March 2018. Sabrina attempted to portray herself as the victim, blaming Mark for driving her into a pathological state with his relentless torture. However, medical tests showed that although Sabrina suffered from a mental disorder, she was not insane and fully understood her actions. Wissam was psychologically dependent on Sabrina despite his physical strength. She had a great influence over him and he would blindly listen to her every word. A former lover of Sabrina spoke out during the trial, describing her as a cunning manipulator rather than a crazy woman. On June 26, 2018, the court found Sabrina Kuder and Wissam Maduni guilty of torturing, insulting, and murdering nanny Sophie. The couple were sentenced to life in prison and must serve at least 30 years before being paroled. However, neither of them pleaded guilty. They repeatedly appealed for a lighter sentence. Sabrina even tried to pretend to be insane for a while to be transferred to a hospital instead of prison. But this plan failed. Mark Walton, who attended the trial, expressed remorse for his past relationship with Sabrina. He said she committed all these barbaric crimes to attract attention and make money from him. Mark sends his deepest condolences to Sophie's parents. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Adrienne Jones. Adrienne Jessica Jones was a bright light in Mansfield in 1995. As a 16-year-old junior at Mansfield High School, she captivated everyone with her beauty, exceptional qualities, and impressive achievements. Adrienne was an outstanding student, consistently excelling in advanced honors courses and demonstrating a strong work ethic. She spent at least 2 hours each night studying to ensure her success, which earned her high grades. Her kindness, intelligence, and infectious spirit made her a role model and a beloved figure among her classmates and teachers. In addition to her academic prowess, Adrienne was a talented athlete. She was a dedicated member of the girls' soccer team, showcasing remarkable skill and dedication on the field. After graduating from Mansfield High School, Adrienne's dream was to become a veterinarian and help animals. After a game injury forced her to temporarily leave her team, Adrienne didn't give up on sports. Instead, she joined the girls' cross-country team, which allowed her to stay active and improve her fitness. She threw herself into the new challenge, working hard to get in shape. Her dedication paid off, and she soon became a key member of the cross-country team. In addition to her academic and athletic pursuits, Adrienne also held down a part-time job, working 20 hours a week at a local fast food restaurant, Golden Fried Chicken. Despite her busy schedule, Adrienne enjoyed being the center of attention, particularly from teenage boys in Mansfield. Her friends would even describe her as a bit of a flirt. She took great care in her appearance, spending at least 2 hours each day on her makeup to ensure she looked perfect. Adrienne, like many teenagers, often tested the limits set by her parents. Despite her good nature, her parents were particularly protective of her due to the changing environment in Mansfield, where crime was on the rise. They implemented a strict 9 p.m. curfew on weekends to ensure her safety, requiring her to provide proof of her activities, such as ticket stubs, if she wanted to stay out later. To prevent her from sneaking out, her father also nailed her bedroom window shut. Although Adrienne occasionally disobeyed her parents and left the house at night to meet her friends, on Sunday, December 3rd, 1995, she was given special permission to stay up late to talk to her boyfriend, Tracy Smith, who was out of town with his parents. During their phone conversation, Adrienne's mother overheard her mention that another call was coming in. When asked about the caller's identity, Adrienne said it was David from her cross-country team, who seemed upset about something. Adrienne's family started their day as usual the next morning, but her mother's concern grew when she heard Adrienne's alarm still going off in her bedroom. When she went to check on her, she discovered that Adrienne was missing, and her bed had not been slept in. Despite trying to stay calm, Adrienne's mother quickly became worried. She initially thought Adrienne might have gone for an early morning run, but this idea was quickly dismissed when she saw Adrienne's running shoes still on the floor. In the past, Adrienne had occasionally sneaked out at night to meet friends, but she had always returned home by morning, making her mother even more worried about her disappearance. Worried about Adrienne, her parents contacted the police. Unbeknownst to them, a shocking discovery was made on a farm several miles away. At around 7 a.m., on Seaton Road in Grand Prairie, Texas, a man was on his way to check his mailbox when he noticed that the gate to his property had been knocked down. Curious, he entered his farm and was met with an unsettling scene. Initially, the man thought he was looking at roadkill, but as he got closer, he realized it was a lifeless teenage girl lying on the ground. The man immediately called the police, who arrived to find a disturbing sight. The teenager had been shot execution style, with 2 bullet wounds on her left cheek and forehead. In addition to these gunshot wounds, her head had suffered severe injuries. Moreover, her arms and legs were covered in scrapes and bruises, indicating that she had run through the farm's barbed wire gate. A teenager's violent murder sparked a desperate investigation. The fact that she was found in her nightclothes suggested she had been preparing for bed when her life was brutally cut short. The execution-style killing led police to consider possible links to gang violence or drugs. After discovering the body on the farm, The Grand Prairie Police immediately alerted all nearby agencies, sending out a detailed description of the victim, including her age, height, weight, and other physical characteristics. They hoped that another agency might recognize the description and make a connection to a missing person. It wasn't long before the Mansfield police got in touch with Grand Prairie officers, having made a match. The Mansfield police identified the murdered teenager as Adrienne Jones. With the victim identified, the police had the heartbreaking task of informing Adrienne's parents about her tragic death. When they broke the news to her mother, she was overcome with grief. In the small town of Mansfield, news of Adrienne's murder spread quickly through her high school, leaving her classmates and friends devastated. Classes were interrupted as the news traveled through the halls, and students tearfully consoled one another. The town was on high alert following the discovery of Adrienne's body in a field, with rumors and theories circulating about her death. One theory was that Adrienne was involved in drugs, while others suspected a serial killer might be living among them. Adrienne's parents cooperated with the police, providing information about the last time they saw their daughter. Her mother specifically mentioned a phone call Adrienne had with her boyfriend, Tracy, and another teenager, David, who joined the call while Adrienne was on the phone. After midnight on the night of Adrienne's murder, one of her younger brothers heard a car engine outside their house. When he looked out the window, he saw a pickup truck driving away. The police were interested in identifying a person named David, who had called Adrienne that night. To learn more, they spoke with Adrienne's cross-country coach, who mentioned a team member named David Graham. However, the coach was surprised to hear that David had called Adrienne, as there was no indication that they had ever interacted before. David Graham was a 17-year-old high school student with big dreams. After watching his first air show, he decided he wanted to become an Air Force pilot. From then on, he dedicated himself to achieving his goal. David was well liked by his peers at Mansfield High School, where he was popular and charming. Many girls were attracted to him, but he was in a relationship with Diane Zamora, a high school senior who shared his desire to enter the military. Diane stood out from the crowd, actively pursuing her aspirations. After Adrienne's murder, the police interviewed David Graham, who acknowledged knowing her from their cross-country team, but claimed their relationship never went beyond friendship. When asked if he had contacted Adrienne on the night of her death, David denied it, saying he was home studying with his girlfriend, Diane Zamora. The police investigated David as a possible suspect, seeking information from Adrienne's friends to see if she had ever mentioned him. However, one of her closest friends, who was privy to Adrienne's secrets, said Adrienne had never discussed David with her. The police also checked Adrienne's phone book and found David's number was not listed, which further led them to believe he was not involved in her murder. As a result, they never administered a polygraph test to David and eventually cleared him as a suspect. The police investigated Adrienne's boyfriend, Tracy Smith, as a suspect in her murder. However, they cleared him after verifying his alibi, which placed him out of town with his family on the night of the murder. Tracy also passed a polygraph test, further supporting his innocence. During his police interview, Tracy suggested they investigate someone named Brian, whom Adrienne had mentioned was calling her on the night of her murder, while they were on the phone. The police identified the Brian in question as Brian McMillian, a local teenager. Their investigation into Brian McMillian revealed that he used to work at a pharmacy near the restaurant where Adrienne used to work. Brian had developed an obsession with Adrienne and would often visit the restaurant to catch a glimpse of her. Eventually, Adrienne grew tired of his constant presence and began hiding in the back whenever she saw him coming. The police questioned Brian McMillian about the murder of Adrienne Jones. At first, he claimed to have no knowledge of her, but later admitted to knowing her. When asked if he had talked to her on the night of her murder, Brian said he didn't remember. He explained that he had been drinking that night due to feelings of depression and loneliness. The officers also asked Brian if he had visited Adrian's house on the night of her murder, and he acknowledged that he might have done so. The police asked Brian's father if his son could take a lie detector test, but his father refused. 1 week later, the police raided Brian's house with guns, a decision made due to concerns that he might be armed. The police took this precaution to ensure everyone's safety, including their own. After Brian was arrested for Adrian's murder, many people came forward to show their support for him. Brian's friends said he was a gentle and non-violent person. His father also confirmed that Brian was at home all night when Adrian was killed and didn't leave. Despite this, Brian was held in jail for 3 weeks, missing Christmas and New Year's, while the investigation and legal proceedings continued. During this time, the district attorney's office asked Brian to take a polygraph test, which he passed successfully. After this, the district attorney's office had little evidence to link Brian to Adrian's murder, so they released him from custody. 9 months into the investigation, the police in Mansfield, Texas, finally got a breakthrough, and it came from Annapolis, Maryland, where Diane Zamora was attending the Naval Academy. Diane Zamora, a cadet at the Naval Academy, allegedly confessed to her fellow students that she and her boyfriend, David Graham, had murdered a girl named Adrian Jones in Mansfield, Texas. The Mansfield police traveled to Annapolis, Maryland, to interview Diane, but she denied making any such admission. The Naval Academy suspended Diane and sent her home pending an investigation. Since Diane was uncooperative, the police went to the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs, Colorado, to question David. Initially, David claimed he didn't know why Diane would fabricate a story about killing Adrian Jones. However, during the interview, David began to crack and asked to write a statement. In a 4.5-page confession letter, David detailed how he and Diane planned and carried out the murder of Adrian Jones, including a cross-country event in November 1995, where he offered to drive Adrian home. During the ride, David and Adrian parked in an elementary school parking lot and had sex. Afterwards, David felt overwhelmed with guilt because he loved his girlfriend Diane deeply and knew that his infidelity would cause her immense pain. One evening, while David was helping Diane study for her SATs, they got into an argument. Unable to keep his secret any longer, David broke down in tears and confessed his infidelity to Diane. He told her that he had hooked up with Adrienne, which shattered Diane's heart and left her feeling deeply hurt and angry. Diane was inconsolable and lashed out at David, screaming and arguing with him. She was so angry that she wished he were dead, and she felt intense hatred towards Adrienne. Diane's emotions were too much to handle, and she struggled to come to terms with what had happened. David pleaded with Diane, promising to do whatever it took to save their relationship. David and Diane decided that the only way to repair their relationship was to kill Adrienne. In his confession letter, David admitted that on December 3rd, he called Adrian Jones and asked her to secretly leave her house late at night to meet with him. He specifically asked Adrian to keep their meeting private and not tell anyone else about it. David originally planned to lure Adrian into a trap, kill her by breaking her neck, and then dispose of her body in a lake. On the agreed night, at 2:30 a.m., David picked up Adrian in his car while Diane hid in the hatchback. They drove to a secluded spot 10 miles out of town, turning off the highway onto Satan Road. David stopped the car, and Adrian subtly adjusted her seat, creating the impression they were about to be intimate. Unbeknownst to Adrian, David had secretly signaled for Diane to emerge from the trunk. Diane came out of the rear of the vehicle and approached the front. Diane confronted Adrian, who was seated in the passenger seat. Diane then hit Adrian on the head with a weight from David's gym set. Despite being severely injured, Adrian managed to escape by crawling out of the car window. David and Diane panicked, and David grabbed his 9mm Makarov weapon to chase after Adrian. Adrienne was severely injured and collapsed in a nearby field due to her head wound. When David caught up to her, he shot her twice and then returned to his car. After Adrienne died, David and his accomplice Diane exchanged "I love you" as their first words to each other. The police later questioned Diane, who had a statement prepared to confess her involvement. David and Diane were arrested and charged with capital murder. Although they initially confessed, they later retracted their statements, with David claiming Diane acted alone and Diane alleging David committed the crime by himself. In 1998, Adrienne's mother requested that the death penalty be removed as a possible sentence for David and Diane. Diane's trial began in February 1998. Multiple witnesses testified that Diane showed no remorse for killing Adrienne. The jury found Diane guilty of capital murder, resulting in an automatic life imprisonment sentence, with the possibility of parole in 40 years. David Graham was convicted of murdering Adrienne Jones and received a life sentence, with the possibility of parole in 40 years. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Susan Wright. Susan Lucille Wright was born on April 24, 1976, in Houston, Texas, to parents Velma Sue and Jimmy Lawrence Wright. She was the eldest of 2 children and had a biological sister named Cindy. As a child, Susan was active, sociable, and creatively talented. During her school years, she developed a passion for dancing and aspired to become a choreographer. With her bright and attractive appearance, as well as her slender figure, she drew many admirers and being the center of attention. After completing high school, Susan tried but was unsuccessful in getting into college. To raise funds for her future education, she decided to take some time off. During this period, she found work as a dancer at a well-known nightclub, performing partially nude on stage. She decided to leave her job and use her savings to enroll in evening courses at a nursing school. To support herself and maintain her independence, Susan took a job as a waitress at a restaurant while pursuing her studies. However, she soon discovered that medicine was not her real passion and had trouble paying for her studies. Consequently, she stopped attending her classes to concentrate on her job. In the summer of 1997, 21-year-old Susan met her future husband, Jeffrey Andrew Wright, at the Galveston restaurant where she worked. He was immediately drawn to her beauty and radiant smile, becoming a regular customer and leaving generous tips. After some time, Jeffrey mustered the courage to ask Susan for her phone number. He would call her daily, sometimes multiple times a day, to arrange romantic dates and surprise her with small gestures, such as sending flowers with heartfelt notes to her workplace. In the evenings, he would meet her and walk her home. The man was 8 years older than Susan, but she didn't consider this a significant issue. He was charming, attentive, and caring, which quickly won her over. However, it soon became apparent that Jeffrey struggled with alcohol and substance abuse. He claimed to have overcome his addiction to drugs and promised to quit drinking entirely. Susan, being young and in love for the first time, believed him. She thought that their love could conquer any obstacle. Shortly after, Susan discovered she was pregnant and excitedly shared the news with Jeffrey. Although he seemed pleased about becoming a father, he didn't take any decisive action, such as proposing or suggesting they move in together. Confused by Jeffrey's behavior, Susan took matters into her own hands. She insisted that their child should be born within a married family, and Jeffrey agreed to her terms. By the time they officially got married, Susan was already 8 months pregnant. They chose to have a quiet, intimate wedding without guests or celebrations, rather than a grand ceremony. Around this time, they purchased a home in a quiet area of Harris County, Texas, and moved in a couple of weeks before the birth of their child. In December 1998, they welcomed their first child, a son named Bradley, and appeared to be the perfect family. In 2001, Susan became pregnant again, and in the spring of 2002, she gave birth to a daughter named Kay. The family had a small dog named Buck, a comfortable family car. Jeffrey worked at a local construction company, and after the children were born, Susan became a stay-at-home mom by mutual agreement. She took care of the kids and created a cozy home environment. The neighbors said that Mrs. Susan was a kind person, friendly, sociable, a caring mother, and a loving wife. However, it was later revealed that the reality of their family life was far from perfect. Her husband was extremely demanding in every aspect of their lives. Susan's days were filled with cleaning, doing laundry, and cooking. Jeffrey demanded freshly cooked meals every day, prohibiting her from preparing meals in advance or reheating leftovers. Maintaining a perfect and clean home was a challenging task, especially with two small children. Additionally, Jeffrey required his clothes to be washed almost daily, as he refused to wear the same item twice. If Susan failed to meet these expectations, she faced insults, humiliation, and even physical abuse. Moreover, Jeffrey was extremely frugal, providing Susan with a meager weekly allowance of $100 to cover all household expenses, including cooking, childcare, and maintenance. Susan had to keep track of every expense, giving receipts to her husband Jeffrey. However, Jeffrey's behavior was a bigger issue. Despite promising to quit drinking, he continued and started using drugs, downplaying it as light doping for work stress. The substances made him aggressive, causing him to harm Susan and their son. Jeffrey denied his behavior was a problem, claiming Susan knew about his substance use before marriage. His parents sympathized with Susan but felt powerless to intervene. After moving in together, Jeffrey's behavior became increasingly aggressive, leading to physical, emotional, and intimate abuse. He initially apologized, but the violence became regular. Jeffrey would often go to the gym 3 times a week to practice boxing as a stress relief measure. He looked forward to sharing this activity with his son when the boy was older. On January 13, 2003, Jeffrey returned home from the gym agitated and on edge. As Susan prepared dinner, he attempted to teach their 5-year-old son some boxing moves but lost control and struck the child, causing the boy to burst into tears. Susan pretended not to notice the incident, but it was the last straw for her. Following dinner, she put the kids to bed. Meanwhile, Jeffrey stayed in the bedroom, where he continued to take drugs. There are different accounts of what happened next. According to Susan, when she went into the room, Jeffrey assaulted her, attempted to rape her, and tried to stab her with a knife. She claimed she fought back in self-defense after managing to take the knife from him. The events that followed are unclear, with different accounts of what happened. According to Susan, when she entered the bedroom, Jeffrey tried to attack her, sexually assault her, and kill her with a knife. However, she claims she managed to grab the knife and defended herself, leading to a fight. Her story changed multiple times, but the version told in court, based on the investigation, was considered more believable. Susan decided to use her dance skills to distract her husband and lower his guard. Wearing a short silk robe over her bare body, she put on a seductive show for Jeffrey. She then suggested a role-playing game that involved tying him up, which he agreed to. Using 3 of Jeffrey's neckties, she bound his hands and one leg to the bed. She used the silk belt from her robe to secure his other leg. With Jeffrey immobilized, Susan created a makeshift gag using her underwear, pretending it was part of the intimate game. To set the mood, she lit candles and turned off the lights. Jeffrey was tied to the bed with a gag in his mouth, unable to move or speak. The room was dimly lit. Jeffrey poured hot wax from a candle onto Jeffrey's chest, which was painful but initially seemed like part of a game they were playing. However, when she poured wax onto his genital area, the pain became unbearable. Jeffrey tried to free himself and scream, but he couldn't. His wife, Susan, took a small sharp knife from the kitchen and began stabbing him repeatedly, starting at his groin and moving up his body, slashing his genitals, legs, abdomen, chest, arms, neck, and face. She began slowly, expressing her grievances with each stab, recounting the insults, humiliations, and abuse she had suffered. As she continued, Susan began to cry and stab faster. Experts later counted 193 shallow knife wounds on Jeffrey's body. Most of these wounds were not fatal, and Jeffrey was conscious for most of the ordeal. Susan's actions suggested she was in a state of extreme emotional distress. Her lawyers argued that she was in a state of affect, unable to stop even when Jeffrey showed no signs of life. She had not considered what she would do next or how she would handle the body. Shallow grave in the backyard. She sat next to her husband's body on the floor for hours. Eventually, she looked around the blood-covered bedroom and knew she had to act before dawn. She carefully checked outside through the window, ensuring the coast was clear. Her gaze landed on a shallow pit in the backyard that Jeffrey had dug for a fountain over the weekend. A plan formed instantly. This pit would become her despised husband's grave. To move the body, Susan used a garden wheelbarrow. This raised questions for investigators, as a petite woman was able to single-handedly lift and transport a man twice her weight out of the house. Suspicions of an accomplice arose but were never confirmed. Under the cover of darkness, Susan discreetly relocated the body to the pit and covered it with a thin layer of soil. She then cleaned up, removing the blood-stained curtains and bed linen, placing them in trash bags and dispersing them in different bins. The blood-soaked mattress was flipped over, as Susan was unsure how to properly clean it. She spent the remaining time until dawn scrubbing blood from the floor, walls, and carpet. Scrubbing the carpet is a big deal, with a large stain that couldn't be removed. In an attempt to eliminate any evidence of the violent confrontation, Susan applied bleach to the affected area, hoping the chemicals would destroy any remaining traces. Susan made a distressing call to her husband's parents in Austin, Texas. She was emotional as she recounted the events. Her husband, under the influence, had physically assaulted her and their son, spilled bleach on the carpet, and then ended their relationship before leaving. Jeffrey's parents were shocked and concerned by the news. Although they were aware that their son had his flaws, they felt genuine sympathy for their daughter-in-law. However, when they learned that he had hit their grandchild, they immediately offered for Susan and the children to come and stay with them. Despite their willingness to help, the young mother declined their offer. She added that she planned to file a police report and reveal all the incidents that had occurred at their residence. 2 days later, Susan visited the police station as her husband's sudden disappearance raised increasing concerns and action was necessary. Susan reported that she and her children had been victims of domestic violence perpetrated by her husband and required protection. She successfully obtained a restraining order against her husband, preventing him from approaching her and the children, although she was already aware that he would never be able to come near them again. As evidence, Susan presented bruises and cuts on her arms, which she alleged were inflicted by her husband using keys when she attempted to defend herself. Additionally, Susan had a small bruise on his face and corroborated that his father had struck him. At first, the tearful woman's story seemed believable and logical. She claimed her husband, under the influence of alcohol and substances, had attacked her and their young son. Then, realizing what he had done, he became scared and fled. However, over time, suspicions grew because Jeffrey had not contacted anyone. He appeared to have run away without his belongings, documents, or mobile phone. He didn't show up for work or visit his parents, and none of his friends or neighbors had seen him. It was as if he had vanished. Susan found it unbearable to stay in the house where she confronted her husband. She couldn't shake the feeling he was still alive and would rise for revenge. She was losing her grip on reality. Even their dog Buck sensed it, constantly barking and trying to dig up the yard where Jeffrey was buried. On January 17th, Susan went to her mother's house with her children. When her mother saw her daughter in person, she fully realized the severity of the situation. Even though she had already been aware of it, Velma directly asked if she had killed her husband, and her daughter broke down in tears, nodding in admission. The daughter then confessed to the crime, revealing the location of her husband's body, and repeatedly expressed uncertainty about what to do next. Following her mother's advice, Susan reached out to lawyer Neil Davis the next day and confessed to killing her husband and attempting to cover up the crime. After gathering all the details, the experienced defense attorney considered possible scenarios and contacted the Harris County District Attorney's Office on January 19th. Davis reported Susan's confession, including the burial of her husband's body in their backyard, and stated that she was willing to provide a full statement at the police station. On January 24, 2003, Susan voluntarily went to the police station, intent on making a full confession. However, her account was disjointed, with confusing details and occasional contradictions. She sometimes referred to her late husband as if he were still alive, expressed fear of him, and requested protection. Consequently, Susan underwent a psychiatric evaluation. The results revealed she had suffered a nervous breakdown and was experiencing depression. Despite this, the evaluation found that Susan was still capable of understanding the actions she had taken. When investigators uncovered the remains of Jeffrey from the makeshift grave in the backyard, they were shocked by the brutality of the scene, having never encountered. Experts counted a total of 193 knife wounds on the victim's body, distributed across various areas, including the groin, legs, shoulders, arms, abdominal area, chest, neck, and face. The majority of these wounds were superficial, meaning they were not life-threatening on their own. However, one head wound was severe enough to have caused death. The large number of superficial wounds suggests that the victim endured a prolonged and agonizing death, likely while still conscious, as his wife repeatedly stabbed him with a small knife. The victim's wrists and ankles showed deep marks from the ties and belt used to bind him. These injuries indicated that the victim had attempted to free himself but was unsuccessful. The ties and belt were still on the body when it was found. Additionally, there were traces of candle wax on the victim's chest and groin area. Susan claimed that the candle wax was an accident, resulting from her husband knocking over a lit candle. However, the prosecution argued that the hot wax was more likely used as a form of torture to inflict suffering on the bound victim. Furthermore, the victim's mouth contained his wife's underwear, which acted as a gag to prevent him from screaming or calling for help. Toxicological tests showed the deceased had alcohol and several controlled substances in his system, which could have led to aggressive and irrational behavior. Initially, the bedroom where the confrontation occurred seemed normal, except for a large bleach stain on the carpet. However, upon closer inspection using special chemical agents and equipment, it became clear that Susan had spent considerable time cleaning up the scene. Once wiped away blood traces were revealed, the true extent of the violence became apparent. Blood was found throughout the room, including on the ceiling, and the mattress was saturated with it. The trial began in late February 2004, with Susan having already spent a year in custody. Her children were being cared for by her parents and sister Cindy. Her lawyer was well prepared, having worked extensively with Susan to build her case. During the trial, Susan frequently broke down in tears as she recounted the events of that horrific night and the abuse she suffered leading up to it. She claimed to have endured years of cruelty and violence at the hands of her husband. The defendant, Susan, claimed that on the evening of the incident, her husband returned home from training in an agitated state. He began demonstrating boxing techniques to their 5-year-old son, Bradley, and said the boy would also take up boxing. When Bradley refused, his father hit him in the face. Susan put the children to bed and then tried to have a serious talk with her husband, urging him to seek help at a clinic. However, he became angry, grabbed his keys, and tried to leave. Susan attempted to stop him, which led to a struggle that caused injuries to her palms and wrists. According to Susan, her husband then struck her, causing her to fall and momentarily lose her bearings. After regaining composure, Susan saw her husband Jeffrey holding a knife, but her testimony became inconsistent. Her lawyer argued she was in a state of affect, leading her to seize the knife and strike Jeffrey. Susan claimed she secured him to a cart with ties and a belt after the confrontation, and candle wax accidentally landed on his body. However, the defendant had no explanation for why her underwear was found in the victim's mouth. In contrast, the prosecution presented a more convincing and logical case. Expert testimony revealed that the victim's wrist and ankle wounds were inflicted before death, likely as part of a ruse to restrain the victim. This also provided a plausible explanation for the gag in the victim's mouth. Additionally, the angle of the injuries suggested that the perpetrator was positioned on top of the victim, rather than struggling with him, which would have resulted in different injury patterns. All the cuts on the victim were inflicted from the front, indicating that the attack occurred while he was lying on his back, unable to move. It was unclear whether Susan had planned her husband's murder in advance and intentionally used the pit he dug for a fountain as a makeshift grave. Prosecutors, however, suspected that she had carefully orchestrated the crime, motivated by the potential insurance payout. The case drew widespread media attention, with Susan being labeled the blue-eyed butcher or blonde meat grinder by the press. Jeffrey's family demanded the harshest possible sentence, while many of their neighbors felt sorry for Susan, recalling instances where she had bruises that she attributed to her own clumsiness, but which may have been signs of physical abuse. Prosecutors initially sought a life sentence for Susan, but later reduced their request to 45 years in prison. In March 2004, she was found guilty and sentenced to 25 years. She showed no emotion when the judge delivered the verdict, appearing detached from the proceedings. A year later, her lawyer's attempt to appeal the decision was rejected. In 2008, Susan and her defense team filed another appeal, which was influenced by new testimony from a previously unknown witness. Misty McEl, wife of former NFL champion Steve McEl, was a key witness. She had a lengthy relationship with Jeffrey Wright in the mid-1990s and was briefly engaged to him. However, she suffered physical abuse, humiliation, and cruel treatment from Jeffrey, leading her to end the engagement and cut ties. Following this new information in Jeffrey's testimony, Susan's prison sentence was reduced to 20 years. She became eligible for parole in 2014 at age 38 but was denied. A second denial followed in July 2017. After 16 years in prison, Susan Wright was released in the winter of 2020 at age 44. She was met by reporters and photographers, causing her to break down in tears and asked to be left alone. Her trial received extensive media coverage, including a broadcast on Court TV. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case, the case of Kat West. Kat West was born on February 15, 1975, in the small town of Davie, Florida. She was the only child of Nancy and John Jonathan Martin. As a child, Kat always wanted a sibling, but her mother's health problems made that impossible. This has made Kat West so attached to her dolls, she treats them like living creatures, sings to them and cherishes them. Kat West was a popular student in school, admired for her good looks and friendly personality. She was very active in extracurricular activities, particularly sports and dance. However, during the teenage years, signs of bipolar affective disorder begin to appear, characterized by depression and anxiety, alternating with periods of hyperactivity, persistently elevated mood and agitation. Only later did her parents realize their daughter's condition, but it was too late. By then, she had turned to alcohol to cope with her emotions. It wasn't until she sought treatment for her addiction that doctors discovered the underlying issue, a bipolar disorder. Despite overcoming her dependency on alcohol, managing her bipolar disorder proved to be a much more daunting task. She was on multiple medications, which caused unpleasant side effects and made her feel unwell. Eventually, the disorder was brought under control, but Kat West had to continue taking medication. Kat West wants to get married and have children, but her personal life is full of hardship, possibly due to her past mental illness and addiction. However, Kat West is a charismatic and attractive person, has many admirers, is often the life of the party and shines in the spotlight. Growing up, Kat West aspired to be a model. She actively pursued her goal, spending time attending auditions and exploring different looks. She was especially attracted to Marilyn Monroe, an actress of the style of the 1950s. Kat West has watched many of Monroe's films, collected her posters and imitated her style and image. Interestingly, Kat West bore a resemblance to her idol, which she proudly acknowledged and cherished. Although her dream of becoming a famous model didn't come true, Kat West's photos were frequently published in local magazines, earning her some recognition, a fan base, and occasional recognition on the streets of her hometown. At the age of 28, she met her life partner, William Jeffrey West. William was born in 1970 in Alabama, came from a typical family. From a young age, he had aspirations of a career in the military or law enforcement. As a diligent student and active sports enthusiast, he was robust, fit, and incredibly focused. In the early 1990s, William joined the U.S. military, initially serving as a military police officer. His dedication led to a promotion as a military recruiter, responsible for enlisting individuals into the Army and Navy. He was eventually promoted to head of a recruiting unit, spending 20 years of his life in military service. William pursued higher education alongside his military career, earning a bachelor's degree in public relations from the University of South Carolina. He then went on to study criminal justice, eventually earning a master's degree. William is a calm and goal-oriented person who likes to keep a low profile. He was a devoted family man, marrying young and having 2 children. After retiring from the military, he became a corporal in the police department of a university town, where he was responsible for ensuring the safety of the campus community. He approached his duties with seriousness and responsibility, never having to use his service firearm throughout his career. Kat West and William first met in the mid-2000s, when William was still serving in the military and married to his first wife. Despite their vastly different personalities, William is a quiet and serious military man, and Kat West is a bubbly and outgoing blonde, and they feel an immediate attraction to each other. In 2004, William, a married man at the time, met Kat West. Despite their 5-year age gap and Kat West struggles with alcohol addiction, but they quickly fell in love. William soon filed for divorce to be with Kat West, and in less than 5 months, they got married in Las Vegas in 2005. After getting married, they welcomed their first child, a daughter named Lola. They moved to Sarah, Alabama, William's home state, where Kat designed their custom-built home, adorning their bedroom with portraits of her idol, Marilyn Monroe. Neighbors described the Williams as a happy couple, despite their very different personalities. Kat West was known for her bold fashion sense, always striving to look stunning and attractive. She loved being the center of attention, often seeking compliments and admiring glances. In contrast, William appeared more reserved and serious, a trait likely developed during his long military career. Kat West's life is a complete contrast to her glamorous appearance and her everyday reality as a housewife. Despite her efforts to make it big in modeling, her career failed to take off after her marriage and the birth of her daughter. Focusing on creating a cozy home and raising her children became her top priorities. However, her domestic life wasn't fulfilling, and she yearned for attention and recognition. With the emergence of social media in the late 2000s, she began sharing pictures online. She was inspired by Barbie and Marilyn Monroe, but gradually became more daring and provocative. Her husband was surprisingly supportive of her new hobby, often serving as her photographer. Eventually, the hobby became a profitable business, earning her income through paid subscriptions. A typical evening found they shopping for prepared seafood, fine brandy, and absinthe from a local supermarket. They would pick out scented candles from a nearby store to set the mood for a romantic evening. Surveillance cameras caught them seemingly carefree and happy as they made their purchases, unaware of the tragedy that was about to happen. After a fun dinner and a few drinks, Cat West began transforming into her online persona, Kitty Cat. She asked Williams to take some intimate photos of her, first in lingerie and then without clothes. Williams agreed and took several revealing shots, which were later posted on Cat West's private online profile, accessible only to her fans. A romantic evening that seemed to end in a night of passion instead led to a tragic ending. The next morning, January 13th, around 5 a.m., a young neighbor of the Williams was on her way to work. Although the sun had not yet risen, it was light enough outside for her to notice something unusual as she passed the Williams house. At first, she didn't realize what it was, but as she slowed down, she saw a nearly naked woman lying motionless on the road. She also thought she saw someone standing on the doorstep of the house, but they quickly disappeared into the shadows when they noticed her approaching. During questioning, the neighbor was unable to definitively state whether she saw Cat West's attacker enter the house or flee down the street. The neighbor, who was shocked and unsure of what to do, hesitated to approach the body. After returning home, she informed her parents, and together they called emergency services to report the distressing discovery. At the operator's request, the neighbor reluctantly approached the body while waiting for help to arrive. She identified the body as Cat West and checked for a pulse, but unfortunately, there was none. Cat West's body was cold and stiff. Cat West was found lying face down on the sidewalk, wearing only a bright pink bra top. There was a pool of blood under her head. Nearby was a bottle of wormwood wine with some of the wine spilled on the road and blood stains on the bottle. A short distance away lay her smashed smartphone. Due to the quiet residential area, there were no other witnesses to the incident, which remains shrouded in mystery. Cat West's car was last seen around 8:30 p.m. and the time her body was discovered at 5 a.m. A key figure who may be able to shed some light on the events is Cat West's husband, Mr. Williams. The investigation is ongoing, with Detective Michael Melhoff being one of the first to arrive at the scene. When the detective arrived at the house where Cat West's body was found, Williams answered the door. He seemed anxious but claimed he didn't know what was going on. When asked about his wife's whereabouts, Williams said he had just woken up and couldn't find her in bed. The detective then told him that a woman's body, identified by neighbors as Cat West, had been found near the house. The man put on a jacket and followed the detective outside, where he confirmed that the body was indeed his wife. However, his reaction was surprisingly calm. He didn't show any extreme emotions, such as crying or screaming, which raised some suspicions. When questioned about his whereabouts and activities during the night, he said he had slept soundly because they had been drinking the previous evening. When asked what he thought might have happened to his wife, he simply shrugged and suggested it could have been an accident. The man also shared some information about his wife's medical history. He said she had bipolar disorder and took medication for it. He also mentioned that she struggled with alcohol and sometimes behaved erratically when she was drunk. He noted that she would occasionally jump on their backyard trampoline, but sometimes missed it and injured herself. A search of the house did not turn up any signs of a struggle or violence. However, some items in the kitchen suggested a recent gathering. 2 plates with leftover food, 2 glasses, and a half-empty brandy bottle were on the kitchen table. Under the table, police found Kat West's high heels and a pair of panties the same color as her bra lying on the floor. However, some bloody napkins in the trash and an open bottle of detergent raised suspicions. Williams claimed that on the evening in question, Kat West had been drinking heavily, which he disliked. After a photo session, he wanted to move to the bedroom for a more intimate setting. He took a short shower and returned to find Kat West still sitting at the table, drinking absinthe straight from the bottle and texting someone on her phone. Williams was angry that she ignored his requests to put away her phone, and he tried to take it from her. A minor scuffle ensued, during which he accidentally elbowed Kat West's face, causing her nose to bleed. Williams explained that the blood on the discarded napkins could have been the blood from his wife's nose that night. He stated that he took the phone from his wife and threw it out the door. Believing his wife would calm down and join him in bed, he claimed to have been unaware of what happened next until the police arrived at his door asking about Kat West. Williams speculated that his wife might have gone outside to retrieve her phone and brought the absinthe bottle with her to finish it. He suggested two possible scenarios: one, that she fell, hit her head on the bottle, lost consciousness, and froze to death, or two, that someone attacked her. However, he could not explain why his wife went out wearing only a bra without any clothes. He attributed this behavior to her being intoxicated from the absinthe. Williams's story raised suspicions due to its inconsistencies and lack of detail, which he attributed to intoxication. However, the investigation was hampered by lack of evidence and no witnesses. The autopsy revealed that the 42-year-old woman died from a severe head injury, likely caused by the absinthe bottle found nearby, combined with hypothermia. Her blood alcohol level was extremely high, suggesting severe intoxication can impair breathing and increase the risk of loss of consciousness. Initially, it seemed that the circumstances of Kat West's death were straightforward. She had been heavily intoxicated, gone outside to search for her phone, and taken the unfinished bottle of absinthe with her. It appeared that she might have lost her balance while reaching for her phone, fallen, hit her head on the bottle, lost consciousness, and ultimately died from the injury and exposure. The presence of the blood-stained bottle near her head and the phone nearby seemed to support this scenario. Yet, the investigation discovered that this explanation was overly simplistic and potentially staged. Experts determined that the head injury was caused by the bottle found next to the body. However, forensic analysis revealed that if the victim had fallen by herself, the bottle would likely have rolled away from her head, rather than remaining parallel to it. The bottle was found to have both Kat West's and her husband Williams's fingerprints on it, as well as some unidentified smudged prints. Further investigation led to a different conclusion. The theory presented in court suggested that Kat West and Williams had an argument. In a fit of anger, Williams allegedly struck her with the bottle, causing a fatal injury. Panicked, he attempted to stage an accidental fall and cleaned up the blood in the house, but failed to dispose of all the evidence. Evidence supporting this theory included a fitness app on Williams's phone, which tracked his movements. The app showed that Williams was active in the house until midnight and again early in the morning before the police arrived. This contradicted his claim of being asleep, leading police to speculate that he was trying to conceal evidence during these times. A neighbor who discovered the body recalled seeing a male silhouette on the doorstep of the house in the early morning hours. However, due to the dim light, she couldn't be certain if it was Williams or someone else. She also couldn't determine if the person entered the house. This information piqued the investigators' interest, especially given Kat West's online persona, Kitty Cat, which had attracted many male admirers who paid to see her revealing photos. This theory suggests that a highly devoted fan may have been responsible. As a homemaker, Kat West often received messages from various men, including some with inappropriate proposals. However, she kept her distance, and there were no explicit threats or harassment found in their communications. A few persistent fans who lived in other states were quickly ruled out as suspects. Despite this, mysterious footprints were found on the doorstep, which didn't belong to the homeowners, but they vanished on the lawn, and their origin remained unknown. Friends, relatives, and neighbors described the Williams family as a happy couple, and he knew her online activities under the name Kitty Cat. While some might have seen it as unusual, he treated it as harmless fun. Their social circle was unaware of Cat West's online persona, just as most of her followers didn't know her real-life identity. Williams firmly denied ever abusing his wife, saying he loved her so much that harming her was impossible. However, they frequently argued, and a text exchange from January 12 revealed a heated dispute. Cat West criticized Williams for not matching her energy and temperament, suggesting they might be incompatible. Despite the lack of direct evidence, Williams remained the prime suspect. Following his arrest, his family and defense attorneys rallied to his defense, believing he was innocent. They insisted that he could never hurt his wife. After his arrest, Williams was unable to afford the $500,000 bail and had to stay in custody until his trial, which took almost 3 years. He was offered a plea deal, admitting guilt in exchange for a reduced sentence, but he refused, maintaining his innocence. The trial, which began in November 2020, drew significant media attention. This publicity put pressure on the judges and jurors. By this time, the possibility of a third party's involvement in Cat West's death was no longer considered. The prosecution argued that all the evidence indicated that Williams was responsible for his wife Cat West's death. They believed that, fueled by jealousy and intoxicated, he hit her with a bottle, causing fatal injuries. In an attempt to cover his tracks, they suggested he staged the scene to look like an accident and removed evidence from the house. In contrast, Williams's defense team claimed that Cat West's death was an accident. They pointed out that her extremely high blood alcohol levels would have impaired her balance and coordination. Cat West's mother testified in support of Williams, describing her daughter as eccentric but stressing that Williams loved her unconditionally and would never harm her. She also appealed to the court to consider the well-being of their child, Lola, who had already lost her mother and now risked losing her father. On January 11, 2021, the jury delivered a guilty verdict for involuntary manslaughter. As a result, Williams received the maximum sentence of 13 years in prison, taking into account the time he had already served. Notably, if he had accepted the initial plea deal offered to him, he may have already been a free man by now. Unfortunately, all of Williams's appeals, led by his lawyers, have been unsuccessful thus far. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case, the case of Rowan Ford. Rowan Ford was born on April 11, 1998, in San Diego, California. Her parents divorced when she was young, and her mother, Colleen, moved with her to a small town called Stella in Missouri. Later, her mom met a man named David, and they got married. Colleen had several children from a previous marriage, and soon after their wedding, she and David had a daughter together. Altogether, Rowan had 2 sisters and 2 brothers, and they shared a very close bond. She spent a lot of time outdoors, riding her bike around town, enjoying swimming, and indulging in her passion for drawing. She also liked going to Sunday school at the local church, where she always volunteered to help other kids who had some issues with their tasks. In November 2007, when Rowan was 9 years old, she was in the 4th grade at the local elementary school. Her mom worked the night shift at a store, while her stepdad spent most of the day on the farm, which made Rowan often fend for herself, making her very independent. On November 2nd, she stayed home alone as usual. Her mom went to work, and her stepdad hadn't returned from the farm yet. The next morning, around 9 a.m., Colleen came home from her night shift and checked Rowan's room, but her daughter wasn't there. She asked her husband where her daughter was, and he said she had asked him if she could have a sleepover at a friend's house, and he had let her go. He didn't even ask the friend's name because their town was very small, and he wasn't worried about anything happening to her. But Colleen started to worry and decided to check with all of Rowan's friends. Since there were only a few streets in their town, it didn't take long, but none of them had seen her, and she hadn't stayed over at any of their houses, which made her mother even more concerned. Colleen searched the whole town but couldn't find her daughter. She went back home and told her husband that Rowan was nowhere to be found. She asked him to call the police and report her missing, but he reassured her that everything was fine and that she would come home soon. After waiting for several more hours with no sign of Rowan, Colleen took matters into her own hands and dialed 911 herself. The local sheriff immediately organized a search operation. He went to their house to speak with David, and as he was the last person to see Rowan before she disappeared, David said that on that evening, while he was working on the farm with his colleague Christopher, their mutual friend Nathan came by. They all decided to go to David's place to have some drinks and play pool. They stopped by the store, bought some alcohol, and went to David's house, where they spent several hours. Later in the night, Christopher asked Nathan to drive him home to the neighboring town, where his trailer was. They persuaded David to join them to continue the fun. Before leaving the house, he checked on Rowan in her room, seeing that she was asleep. David left with his friends, and they stopped by the store again to grab more alcohol and headed to Christopher's trailer, where they continued drinking for about an hour. After that, David decided to head home and asked Nathan to give him a ride. Nathan agreed but chose to take back roads instead of the main highway. By that time Nathan was quite drunk and didn't want to risk encountering the police. Nathan dropped David off and drove home. David went straight to bed. Soon after, he was awakened by Rowan, who asked if she could sleep over at a friend's house. Without much thought, he agreed and fell back asleep. Police approached this story with some skepticism. What puzzled them most was the fact that a 9-year-old girl decided to go to her friend's house in the middle of the night, and her stepfather let her go without even asking which friend she was talking about. The sheriff considered that David might be hiding something or directly involved in Rowan's disappearance, but he had no evidence to support this theory. Police searched the town and its surroundings until late at night. Local residents immediately joined the search, as they all knew Rowan's family and wanted to help. The population of Stella was only about 150 people, so news of her disappearance spread throughout the county. People were used to being able to let their children play outside without a worry, as nothing ever happened in such a quiet place. But now that Rowan vanished without a trace, and the police were unable to find her for a whole day, the residents of Stella were in a state of panic. The search for Rowan yielded no results on the first day. However, the investigation progressed on November 4th when the police spoke with Christopher in a neighboring town. He corroborated David's account, but revealed that David had not contacted him to inform him of Rowan's disappearance. Christopher stated he had not spoken with Rowan or her friends since that evening. Despite an expanded search with more volunteers, the police failed to find Rowan or any clues about her disappearance. The following day, the FBI joined the investigation while the local police continued searching the town and surrounding areas. As a result of growing skepticism towards David's account, detectives started focusing on a potential abduction. They spoke with all of Rowan's friends and verified that none of them had seen her on the night she went missing. As investigators questioned David, his account raised even more suspicions. David's details were inconsistent and contradictory. He altered the timeline of his whereabouts that night on multiple occasions. Additionally, David speculates that it is possible that Rowan left without his permission, which makes his story even more suspicious. During their investigation, FBI agents found out that David had borrowed his mother's car on the night of Rowan's disappearance, a detail he initially left out when questioned by the police. This new information led the authorities to seize both his mother's car and his own pickup truck for forensic examination. But unfortunately, no evidence was discovered. As part of the investigation, detectives wanted to speak with Christopher and Nathan again, since both had been with David that evening. Christopher was invited to the police station for further questioning, where he recounted the same story as before. He also agreed to take a polygraph test, which showed no signs of dishonesty. After leaving the police station and returning to work, Christopher noticed Sheriff Clark's car and signaled for him to stop. As the sheriff of Whitton, where Christopher lived, Clark had known him since childhood. Sheriff Clark was close friends with Christopher's foster parents and was someone Christopher had always looked up to and sought advice from in times of need. Sheriff Clark met with Christopher to discuss Rowan's disappearance. Although familiar with the case, Clark hadn't been directly involved since the investigation was led by the Stella Department. During their conversation, Clark noticed that Christopher was acting strangely, which led him to suspect that Christopher might be hiding something. Given the gravity of the situation and Rowan's uncertain fate, Clark shared his concerns with the FBI. His call prompted investigators to consider the possibility that Christopher might be withholding crucial information that could link Rowan's stepfather to her disappearance. They wondered if Christopher's actions were directed by Rowan's stepfather to lie, and whether Christopher feared being seen as an accomplice if he told the truth. Sheriff Clark told the FBI agents that he had a close relationship with Christopher and offered to help persuade him to cooperate. That evening, Christopher visited Colleen's house to ask about the search progress. FBI agents also arrived to speak with Colleen again and saw Christopher there. They asked him questions, and he repeated his previous account. However, Christopher then mentioned for the first time that he didn't rule out David's possible involvement in Rowan's disappearance. He expressed his willingness to help uncover the truth, even if it was terrible, and suggested wearing a wire to talk to David and try to get him to confess. The detectives decided against this approach. Instead, they asked Christopher to suggest locations where David might have hidden Rowan's body. Christopher provided several locations, which the police searched the next morning. Meanwhile, FBI agents questioned David again, but he continued to deny any involvement. Detectives searched Christopher's home for leads, but the search yielded no results. Meanwhile, Christopher visited the sheriff's office to discuss his encounter with the FBI with Clark. During their conversation, the sheriff sensed that Christopher was holding back information. After their meeting, Clark reached out to the detectives again, suggesting that Christopher might be withholding crucial information that helped prove David's involvement in the case. The FBI agents asked the sheriff to persuade Christopher to open up, as he had been in regular contact with Clark to discuss the case. It seemed that Christopher wanted to share important details but was hesitant to do so for unknown reasons. The following day, November 7th, the police asked Christopher to return to the station. They requested his permission to search a safe located in David's house, where Christopher had been living temporarily and still had some belongings. Christopher agreed to the search and also allowed the police to search his trailer and car. Additionally, Christopher voluntarily provided a DNA sample and agreed to answer the detectives' questions again. During the questioning, he was asked to confirm David's story, but this time, Christopher revealed that his friend's account was not entirely accurate. The investigators then pressed him to disclose what really happened that evening. Christopher became agitated when the police treated him like a suspect in Rowan's disappearance. He refused to continue the conversation and left the station after warning the detectives that he might hire a lawyer. Later that evening, Christopher met with Sheriff Clark to express his concerns about the detectives' behavior. Clark acknowledged Christopher's right to remain silent but explained that the police were doing everything possible to find Rowan. Christopher stated that he would no longer cooperate with the detectives and would only speak with Clark if he had any further information to share. Clark continued to encourage Christopher to open up, and eventually, Christopher broke down in tears, claiming that he loved Rowan and would never harm her. During his time living with the David family, Christopher formed a close bond with Rowan and the other children. They grew to treat him like one of their own, even affectionately referring to him as Uncle Christopher. Sheriff Clark realized that Christopher was on the verge of revealing crucial information, but just as he was about to open up, a visitor arrived at the police station, briefly distracting Clark and causing Christopher to leave. Sheriff Clark reached out to the FBI, updating them on his conversation with Christopher. Clark explained that Christopher was almost ready to disclose what he knew, but warned that pressuring him too hard could lead to him becoming defensive and seeking the help of a lawyer. Clark recommended giving Christopher time to reflect, and the detectives agreed. The search for Rowan continued the following day but yielded no results. However, a new clue came on November 9th, exactly 1 week after her disappearance. Search teams converged on a remote area near the town of Powell, about 10 miles from Stella, and made a significant discovery in the fields and woods, a large pit in the ground. When authorities searched the area, they found Rowan's body hidden under leaves and debris. She was not wearing any clothing from the waist down except for a pair of stockings. A medical examination revealed signs of strangulation and evidence of a sexual assault. After the discovery, FBI agents reached out to Sheriff Clark, asking him to speak with Christopher again. Hoping Christopher would now be more forthcoming. Sheriff Clark learned that earlier that morning, Christopher had visited the station, looking for him, and told other officers that he needed to speak with Clark urgently. Sheriff Clark then began searching for Christopher, checking all his usual locations, but he was nowhere to be found. This continued until Christopher contacted Sheriff Clark himself, sounding distressed and asking if he was being followed. Christopher explained that after hearing about Rowan's body, he had driven around town to clear his head and noticed a gray car following him. Sheriff Clark assures Christopher that he knows nothing about the surveillance and suggests they meet in person. When they met, Christopher appeared nervous and expressed concerns for his safety. He feared that with Rowan's body found, he might be accused of murder and that someone might seek revenge against him. Clark took Christopher to the police station, and he said that now when the case had been classified as a homicide, it was time for Christopher to reveal everything he knew. However, when Clark asked Christopher to share what David had done to Rowan, Christopher became emotional and hesitant to talk at the station. He explained that there were too many people around and suggested they move to a quieter location. Clark agreed, and they drove to a small bridge a few miles outside of town. Once they arrived, Christopher asked Clark to handcuff him. Clark was surprised but tried to reassure Christopher that it wasn't necessary. Christopher insists that what he is about to say will change everything and that Clark will then have to arrest him. Christopher then began recounting the events of that night. He told Clark that he, Nathan, and David had gone to his trailer to continue drinking. Later, his friends decided it was time to head home. Nathan gave David a ride, and they chose to take back roads to avoid the police. Christopher had shocked Clark that he had intended to sexually assault Rowan. To carry out his plan, Christopher took advantage of the time when his friends were busy taking a detour through the field. He drove straight to David's house via the main highway. Under the cover of darkness, he slipped into Rowan's room, picked her up, and quietly transported her to his vehicle, carefully avoiding detection as she slept. When they reached his trailer, he sexually assaulted Rowan. This was interrupted when Rowan regained consciousness and tried her best to free herself, but to no avail. During the crime, Christopher took precautions to avoid recognition, deliberately choosing to keep the lights off and maintain his silence. He originally planned to return Rowan to her home under the guise of innocence, but under the illumination of a bright moon, Rowan finally laid eyes on Christopher as he transported her from the trailer. He grabbed a rope, resorted to force to resolve his predicament, and took Rowan's life with his bare hands. He frantically thought of ways to cover up his crime. He got in his car and began driving around the county, pondering methods of disposing of the body. He then remembered a large pit near a neighboring town and headed in that direction. When he arrived, he dumped Rowan's body in the hole and attempted to cover it with tree branches. Returning to the trailer, Christopher discovered traces of Rowan's blood on his clothes and mattress. He also realized he needed to dispose of her pants, underwear, and the rope used to kill her. He gathered these items and placed them in a large barrel, intending to burn them. However, he quickly reconsidered, realizing that a large fire would likely attract unwanted attention. Instead, Christopher dragged the barrel into a shed, closed the door, and started the fire inside. This revelation shocked Clark, who had previously suspected David of committing the crime and believed Christopher was withholding information. It was difficult for Clark to accept that a man he had known for nearly 20 years, a man with 3 young children of his own, was capable of such brutality. Although Christopher appears to be a good-natured man, his true nature is much more worrying. After finishing his story, Christopher willingly went to the police station with Clark. Once there, Christopher repeated his confession to the FBI agents and was subsequently arrested for murder. He also gave the authorities permission to search his trailer and car. As he concluded his confession, Christopher expressed regret over his actions and stated that he had cried uncontrollably the following day. The detectives then informed David about Christopher's confession. Given David's suspicious behavior and inconsistent statements, they suspected he might be covering for his friend. However, during interrogation, David revealed a shocking new testimony. David claimed that when he found Rowan missing from her room, he suspected Christopher might have taken her. He took his mother's car and drove to Christopher's trailer. He found Rowan lying on the bed. Christopher leaned towards her. Instead of rescuing Rowan, David joined in and also sexually assaulted her. He then helped Christopher kill her and dispose of her body. David reported that during that traumatic incident, his brain went into shock, and he had no memory of the night for several days. The detectives, surprised by this new information, re-questioned Christopher to verify David's claim. However, Christopher maintained that David was not involved and that incident unfolded as he had initially described. The inconsistencies puzzled the detectives, but Christopher's account still matched incident that had occurred. Medical examination revealed that the victim was strangled with a thin rope, a detail that only the killer would be aware of. A search of the trailer led to the discovery of a barrel containing ashes, and hair similar to Rowan's was found in Christopher's car. Although investigators were still uncertain about the truthfulness of each man's account, both David and Christopher made incriminating statements. As a result, David was also arrested, and the case were sent to court for further proceedings. During the trial, Christopher requested that his statements be excluded from the case, arguing that he was not aware they could be used against him and that the police had violated his rights. However, the judge rejected this request, as all of Christopher's conversations with investigators were voluntary. Christopher also attempted to present mitigating circumstances, citing his difficult childhood as a factor. He had been shuffled between biological and foster parents from a young age, which had a significant impact on him. Despite these efforts, Christopher was unable to avoid punishment. In 2012, 5 years after the murder, Christopher was sentenced to death. He appealed the sentence, but was unsuccessful. In contrast, David's situation was more complex. Although he admitted to assaulting and killing Rowan, his account conflicted with Christopher's statements, creating a significant problem. If the prosecution had charged David with murder, it could have potentially led to Christopher's conviction being overturned, allowing David to avoid accountability as well. However, due to the lack of concrete evidence, such as DNA, in fact, they were still uncertain about David's involvement. Although it was possible that David might have collaborated with Christopher in committing the crime, there was no supporting evidence for this theory. To minimize the risk of overturning Christopher's sentence, the prosecution made the difficult decision to reduce David's charges. As a result, David pleaded guilty to 2 lesser charges: child endangerment and obstruction of justice. David received an 11 years prison sentence, with a minimum of 5 years to be served. This outcome sparked widespread outrage, as many felt that if David was indeed involved in the murder, his punishment was disproportionately lenient. Unfortunately, this sentence is now final, and it is unlikely that David will face retrial for this case. Christopher remains in prison awaiting execution, but it's uncertain whether the death penalty will be carried out due to the often lengthy time between sentencing and execution, which can span decades, meaning he might spend the rest of his life in prison instead. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Petit family. The Petit family was revered as a model family, exceeding expectations with their stable economic background and exemplary children. They effortlessly commanded admiration from those around them. William Petit, the patriarch, was a Connecticut native and a standout athlete in high school, particularly in basketball, where he naturally assumed a leadership role. In addition to his athletic prowess, he was also the valedictorian of his class, as evidenced by his law degree from Dartmouth University. However, his true passion lay not in law, but in helping people, caring for the sick, and making the world a better place. So, after graduating, he pursued a career in medicine at the University of Pittsburgh. During his 3rd year of residency at the Children's Hospital of Pittsburgh, William met Jennifer Hawke, an oncology nurse and co-director of the health center's pre-graduate internship program. They soon fell deeply in love, and those who knew them attested that they were perfect for each other. They married in 1985, and 4 years later, they welcomed their first daughter, Haley. The pregnancy spurred them to form a large family, leading them to purchase a house in Cheshire, Connecticut. On November 17, 1995, their second daughter, Michaela, was born. After giving birth, Jennifer resumed her work as a nurse and co-director of the internship. Sadly, she was later diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, a disease that has no cure, which she fought against for the rest of her life. Despite this, her family remained supportive throughout. At just 10 years old, their eldest daughter began raising funds for the National Multiple Sclerosis Society, an endeavor that would yield significant sums over the years. Meanwhile, Michaela excelled academically and planned to take over the fundraising efforts when her sister went to college, enabling her to continue making a positive impact in her community. Having spent the summer learning to cook, she often delighted in preparing meals for her family. Tragically, this ordinary activity led to a fateful encounter with the perpetrator. On a July night in 2007, Michaela was preparing dinner for her family, but required additional ingredients for her recipe. So she and her mother went to the nearest market. Joshua Komisarjevsky, who had recently been released from prison, happened to be at the same location. Komisarjevsky's childhood was marked by trauma and complexity. Born to teenage parents, he was adopted by the Komisarjevsky family, a renowned European artistic dynasty, just a week after birth. His adoptive family was deeply religious and enforced strict discipline, which contributed to his struggles in school despite his high IQ. Eventually, his parents opted to homeschool him. During his trial, Komisarjevsky alleged that he was sexually abused by a cousin during childhood, but his family chose to keep the incident quiet. This traumatic experience likely contributed to the development of his rebellious and chaotic personality. By 14, Joshua Komisarjevsky had faced accusations of abusing his sister, and around this time he committed his first burglary, launching his career as a thief. In 2002, he was arrested for the first time on 18 counts of burglary and theft, earning him a 9-year prison sentence. During the trial, he made a chilling admission, revealing that he derived pleasure from listening to people while they slept and invading their privacy, feeding off their insecurity. Released on parole in 2007 at 27, officials deemed him a threat to society, a calculating criminal with perverted tendencies. But the jury disregarded these warnings, deeming Joshua fit for release. After his release, he moved into a halfway house for ex-convicts, where he encountered his future accomplice, Stephen Hayes. Hayes had a lengthy history of incarceration, starting at the age of 16 in 1980. Throughout the years, he was repeatedly arrested for violent robbery and burglary, earning him multiple sentences. In 2004, he received a prison sentence, only to be granted parole in 2006, which ultimately led him to the same residence where he crossed paths with Komisarjevsky. On the night of July 22, 2007, Michaela Petit was busily preparing dinner for her family, only to realize she needed additional ingredients to complete her recipe. She asked her mother to drive her to the nearest market to pick up the necessary items. What they didn't know was that they were being closely watched by Komisarji, who took meticulous note of every detail, from the make and model of their vehicle to their facial features and Michaela's distinctive blonde hair. After finishing their shopping, the Petit family returned home, oblivious to the fact that they were being tailed. The family had a peaceful dinner, unaware it would be their last together. Later, while the others slept, William Petit dozed off in the living room. Suddenly, strange noises shattered the peace. William was attacked, beaten with a baseball bat, and left tied up in the basement. The intruders proceeded upstairs to locate Haley's room, where they found her asleep. Haley and her sister Michaela were bound to their bedposts by their hands and feet, their heads shrouded by pillowcases. In the master bedroom, Jennifer Petit slumbered peacefully. The intruders crept in and roused her effortlessly, swiftly restraining her hands and feet. With the family members under their control, the intruders took their time to survey the premises, even pausing to smoke cigarettes in the living room. After ransacking the home for jewelry, cash, and other valuables, they finally prepared to depart. As the Petits heard the burglars making their exit, they must have thought the ordeal was finally over. But, unbeknownst to them, their torment was only just beginning. After selling stolen items at a pawn shop, the ex-convicts were disappointed to find they hadn't gotten as much money as they had expected. Motivated by greed, they decided to return to the house. There, they found a check register with $40,000 and planned to steal $155,000. Before going back, they filled a couple of gasoline cans, which was captured on surveillance camera footage. Back at the house, they presented their plan to Jennifer, threatening to kill her entire family if she didn't cooperate. Desperate to protect her daughter, Jennifer agreed to accompany Stephen to the bank the next morning. Meanwhile, Joshua took advantage of Jennifer's absence by entering Michaela's room, where he untied her and began to undress her. He took photos with his cell phone and sexually assaulted her, recording the act. Afterwards, he took her to the bathroom to clean her and ensure no DNA evidence was left behind. Then, he ordered her to put her pajamas back on and tied her up again. The autopsy of Michaela later revealed evidence that Komisarji had raped her. During the examination, State Medical Examiner Dr. Wayne Carver found Arvi's DNA in her body. At the bank, everything appeared normal, but Stephen was unaware of Jennifer's actions in the queue before she approached the teller. While waiting in line, Jennifer wrote a discreet note on a flyer asking for assistance. The note read, "My name is Jennifer Hawk Petit. I have $115,000 in my savings account, and I need to withdraw it. I'm in a desperate situation. My family is being held hostage and will be killed if I don't comply. Please, someone, call the police." Despite Jennifer not having any identification, the teller decided to give her the money. As soon as Jennifer received the cash, she left the bank and returned to the car where her captor was waiting. Meanwhile, the bank employee promptly called the police to report the incident. The manager informed the 911 dispatcher that Hawk Petit claimed the home invaders were being courteous, and that she believed their sole intention was to steal money. In response to the bank's alert, the Chester police carefully assessed the situation, establishing a discreet vehicle perimeter without alerting the intruders. With the situation now under surveillance, the police observed from a safe distance, opting not to intervene just yet. Joshua boasted to his accomplice about attacking Michaela, implying he'd do the same to Jennifer. Stephen restrained and undressed Jennifer while William, hearing her cries, yelled up and was told to calm down. Regaining consciousness, William freed himself, crawled to the stairs and escaped to the backyard, fearing they'd kill them all. Joshua went to check on William, only to discover that he had escaped. In her later confession, Hayes revealed that while she and Stephen were raping Hawk Pettit on the living room floor, Komisarski burst in and announced that William had fled. Upon hearing this, Stephen strangled Jennifer to death, continuing to assault her even in her final moments. Shortly after, they heard William's cries for help. A neighbor, initially unaware of the traumatized boy's identity due to his severe injuries, called 911, realizing the police would soon arrive. To eliminate all evidence, the intruders doused Jennifer's lifeless body and parts of the house, including the daughter's bedrooms and their own clothing, with gasoline. Investigators later found traces of the accelerant on the Pettit sisters' beds and the clothes they wore. Hayes and Komisarski set the house ablaze and fled, unaware that the authorities had set up a perimeter a few miles ahead. Within 5 minutes, they collided with a police vehicle, and after being surrounded, the two perpetrators were pulled from their car and arrested. They were immediately identified as ex-convicts. Meanwhile, the fire raging through the house was growing in intensity. An ambulance arrived, and Dr. William Pettit, the gravely injured father, was rushed to the nearest hospital. Soon after, firefighters battled the blaze, and upon extinguishing it, they stumbled upon a horrific scene amidst the remnants of the house. The first body discovered was Jennifer's, her remains charred with remnants of rope bound to her ankles. Upon reaching the second floor, they found Michaela still tied to her bed, having succumbed to the devastating flames. In a surprising twist, Haley had managed to break free from her restraints and attempted to escape, but sadly collapsed just a few meters away, overcome by the toxic smoke. William managed to free himself from his restraints, escape the house, and crawl to a neighbor's yard to seek help. The neighbor failed to recognize him at first, due to the severity of his injuries. Both Hayes and Komorowski confessed to the murders. During her interrogation, detectives noted that Hayes smelled of gasoline throughout. Each assailant accused the other of being the driving force and mastermind behind the home invasion. Komorowski's diary, later entered into evidence, revealed that he blamed William for the murders, calling him a coward and claiming that he could have saved his family if he had wanted to. The trial of Stephen Hayes began on September 13, 2010, with a jury comprising 7 women and 5 men. The defense argued that Joshua Komorowski was the mastermind behind the crime, responsible for escalating its violent nature, while prosecutors argued that both Hayes and Komorowski shared responsibility. After approximately 5 hours of deliberation on October 5th, the jury found Hayes guilty. The sentencing phase began on October 18th, with the jury initially divided over recommending life imprisonment or death. Hayes' defense argued that life imprisonment without parole would be a harsher punishment. On November 8th, the jury recommended the death sentence for Hayes on each of the 6 capital felony counts. Earlier, Hayes had attempted to negotiate a plea bargain for a life sentence, but prosecutors sought the death penalty. Dr. William Pettit, the sole survivor, remarked on the verdict, while the Connecticut State Judicial Branch took the unprecedented step of offering post-traumatic stress assistance to jurors, acknowledging the trial's profoundly disturbing nature. This historic measure was necessitated by the jurors' 2-month exposure to graphic images and gruesome testimony during the triple murder trial, marking the first time the state judicial branch had provided such support. On December 2, 2010, Hayes expressed remorse for the suffering he had inflicted on the Pettit family, stating that his own death would be a welcome relief and hoping it would bring peace and comfort to those he had hurt. Judge John Blue handed down 6 death sentences and an additional 106 years for other crimes. However, in August 2015, Hayes's death sentence was commuted to life imprisonment when Connecticut abolished capital punishment. The trial of Joshua Komisarjevsky began on September 19, 2011. His lawyers offered a guilty plea in exchange for a life sentence, but prosecutors sought the death penalty, arguing that Komisarjevsky was under Hayes' influence. Komisarjevsky was found guilty on October 13, 2011, and the jury recommended the death penalty on December 9, 2011. During sentencing, Komisarjevsky expressed shame and remorse for the harm caused, claiming he had not intended to kill anyone. Judge Blue set July 20, 2012 as Komisarjevsky's execution date, underscoring his responsibility for the crime. However, like Hayes, Komisarjevsky's death sentence was converted to life imprisonment in August 2015, following Connecticut's abolition of the death penalty. The trials and sentencing of Hayes and Komisarjevsky represent a dark and pivotal chapter in Connecticut's legal history. The heinous nature of the crimes and the emotional toll on all involved, including the jurors, exposed the complexities and challenges of the legal system in dealing with such atrocious acts. Dr. Petit's statements during the trials poignantly highlighted the lasting impact of the crime on surviving family members and the community, which continues to pay tribute to the memory of the victims. The sole survivor, Dr. William Petit, was released from the hospital just 4 days after admission to attend his family's funeral. Tormented by guilt and the anguish of having survived, he later founded a foundation to aid children and young victims of violence, raising hundreds of thousands of dollars. He later pursued a career in politics, becoming a state representative as a member of the Republican Party. The brutal murders of the Petit family have had a profound and lasting impact on the community, which comes together every year to honor their memory. Lingering questions persist among family members and the public regarding whether the authorities responded adequately to the crisis, particularly with respect to the time spent observing the situation from a safe distance, which may have been critical in preventing the devastating outcome. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today, we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Michelle Leng. Snapper Point is an Australian conservation area situated near Fraser Park Beach, close to Catherine Hill Bay, New South Wales. The area surrounding Cape Snapper Point draws adventurous tourists who climb it in search of remarkable photographs, as it comprises entirely of steep, irregular volcanic rocks. On April 24, 2016, at 10:30 a.m., a group of hikers walking at the foot of the promontory noticed a large object floating on the surface of the water. They reported the discovery to law enforcement, and the police arrived at the scene and removed an unidentified package. After examining the findings on shore, they discovered the body of an unknown woman with multiple injuries, suggesting that the victim had been subjected to a brutal assault. She was not identified, but news reports described her as an Asian female between 20 and 30 years old, of average height. 5 years earlier, a major airport in the northern Sichuan province of the People's Republic of China saw off 20-year-old Leng during a torrential downpour. The girl tearfully said goodbye to her beloved mother after the death of her father in 2008. Her mother became the closest person to her. Leng flew from her native China to the distant country of Australia, where she had dreamed of studying since her childhood. 11 hours later, the plane landed in Sydney. It was the first time Leng had made such a long journey alone, but she was determined to achieve her dream, so she easily overcame any difficulties. She was met at the airport by her own aunt and her son, who was only 2 years younger than Leng. The oldest and most populous state in Australia is New South Wales, where 1 in 3 Australians live. It was here that Leng's early years were spent after moving here. Since coming to Australia, Leng has lived happily with her 48-year-old aunt, her young husband, Derek Barrett, and her cousin in their camping house. The girl had a private room where she spent almost all of her free time. Leng loved to read and draw, so she would spend hours in her room pursuing her favorite hobbies. For the convenience of living in another country, Leng changed her name to Michelle. Michelle Leng enrolled at the University of Technology in Sydney, where she successfully studied economics and hospitality management. Michelle was very intelligent and motivated. She was not afraid of anything new and easily made new acquaintances. Like many girls of her age, she often posted photos on social networks, where she drank cocktails with friends, as well as pictures of her extreme adventures to dangerous natural places. Michelle was an adventurous person who could easily travel to Hobart for a vacation and regularly took day trips around New South Wales. In recent weeks, she posted videos from West Head Lookout near Sydney Harbour, photos from Resolute Beach north of the city, from Ku-ring-gai Chase National Park, and from Jervis Bay on the south coast. On June 13, 2013, she visited Snapper Point, where she fearlessly photographed herself on the edge of a cliff and posted this striking photo to her Instagram account. Michelle excelled in her studies, made new friends, and found a part-time job. Desiring to organize her personal life, Michelle communicated regularly with men on dating sites and went on trial dates. The woman led an active and busy life, attending classes during the day and then rushing to work on her weekends. She made sure to meet friends and visit unusual places. On April 21, 2016, Michelle met up with a friend at the mall. They had lunch together, did some shopping, and then Michelle boarded a train at the train station. She got off at Central Station around 4:30 in the afternoon and was never seen again. 2 days later, Derek went to the train station to meet his wife, who had returned from a business trip. Aunt Michelle asked Derek about his niece, and he said he had not seen her in 2 days. Derek Barrett had been unemployed for a long time, so he often stayed up late at the computer and woke up only in the afternoon, so it was obvious that he might not have seen Michelle. But the situation was such that nobody had seen Michelle since April 22nd, and her phone was switched off. Having called all of Michelle's acquaintances and friends, the aunt became even more worried. She inspected the girl's room, but it was in perfect order, as usual. After going through the girl's laptop, the family concluded that Michelle had not returned from her date, and perhaps something had happened to her. Her absence was quite unusual, as she was in regular contact with friends and family members living in China and Australia. The next day, Michelle's aunt and her husband Derek went to the police station and filed a missing persons report. They also reported Michelle Leng's disappearance to the Chinese embassy on April 24, 2016. The body of an unidentified woman, wrapped in a plastic bag, was discovered by a group of tourists at Snapper Point. While Michelle's relatives in China and Australia were searching for her, local news channels reported the finding of the woman's body. A compiled sketch of the victim made it clear that it was Michelle. It took the police 3 days to identify her after they made a sketch of her. From that point on, Michelle Leng was officially listed as a missing person, and an investigation was launched. After interviewing Michelle's close relatives who were living with her, the initial theory was that she had been attacked by an unknown person with whom she had planned to meet that day. CCTV footage tracked the girl's movements on the day she went missing, but the surveillance cameras and footage from a short train journey showed that Michelle was alone. According to her friends, she had no plans to meet anyone that day and was in a rush to get home. Reviewing social networks and correspondence of the girl did not confirm the presence of a young man with whom she could have met. The version about a secret stranger who could have committed the crime was not confirmed. The results of the forensic examination confirmed that Michelle's body had sustained multiple injuries, and she had most likely tried to fight off her attacker, resulting in multiple stab wounds. Police Chief Inspector Gary Jubilan said the interpretation of the situation is that Michelle was brutally assaulted before her death, but she was spotted on her way home and did not go out anywhere else, so the perpetrator must have attacked her in that area. The inspector also noted that most likely the perpetrator had deliberately chosen a very secluded area of such a beautiful place, as the body was found in an area frequented by tourists and fishermen, but the place was somewhat isolated. Forensic analysis indicated that Michelle Leng's body had been in the water for no more than 48 hours, and likely much less, suggesting the body had been dumped quite recently. The Chief Inspector of Police stated that although the location where the body was found was distant from the national park entrance, there was a parking lot near the tourist attraction, implying the body may have been transported there by car. Homicide detectives studied CCTV and traffic camera footage to determine Michelle Leng's last known movements. They continued to contact her family members, friends, and co-workers to gather additional information. In addition to the search efforts, interviews were conducted with relatives and acquaintances in the hope of reconstructing a detailed picture of the event and establishing a full understanding of the relationships within the family where Michelle lived. Police Inspector Gary Jubilan stated with certainty that based on the gathered information, Michelle was a very responsible person who always kept in touch with her family and informed them of her whereabouts. Therefore, there were serious concerns when she suddenly disappeared. However, for 2 days, her family either did not notice she was missing or chose to ignore it. Police called Derek Barrett in for questioning as the last person to see Michelle alive. Investigators were skeptical of his accounts of nightlife and long daytime naps, so he was re-interviewed. The investigators began asking questions about his relationship with Michelle and asked him to remember the last time he had seen her. Unable to withstand the pressure of the interrogation, Derek refused to answer the question and demanded a lawyer. Such strange and uncertain behavior led to a number of doubts, and Derek was arrested as a suspect. However, the arrest had grounds, as on the eve of the interrogation, investigators checked his cell phone signal and found that he was in the same area where Michelle's body was found on April 24th. Additionally, when police obtained surveillance footage from a parking lot, it captured a car matching the description of Derek Barrett's vehicle in the early morning hours of April 24th, leaving no doubt that he was there. Derek denied and claimed to the last that it was just a coincidence, and the car was not his, but the footage was clear enough to prove his presence in the parking lot. Police have charged a 27-year-old man in the death of 25-year-old Michelle Leng. Her naked body, with multiple stab wounds, was found in a blowhole on the Central Coast, New South Wales. The news of the arrest and charge against Derek has left Michelle's entire family in shock. Police spoke to Michelle's mother, who was devastated by the news of her daughter's death. She rushed to Sydney to see the site of her only daughter's dream and death, but the woman was still unable to comprehend her daughter's passing. Derek Barrett, age 27, who was married to Michelle Leng's aunt, was charged with the 25-year-old student's murder. This occurred after the police released CCTV footage that captured her last shopping trip in the central business district of Sydney on April 21st, as well as her journey back home. The footage shows her shopping at a mall on Pitt Street before boarding a train at St. James Station to travel to Erskine Park, located in the southwest of Sydney. The police believe that Michelle returned to her family home in Erskine Park in the afternoon, where she lived with her uncle, aunt, and cousin, and was presumably murdered there. The autopsy revealed that Michelle tried to fight off her attacker and was stabbed several times in defense, stabbing her more than 30 times in total. CCTV footage is believed to have captured a vehicle entering Lake Munmora National Park at around 7 a.m. on April 24th, and police claim Michelle Leng's body was inside the vehicle. Despite Derek Barrett being detained and charged, the investigation continued, and gradually other details of Michelle Leng's final moments surfaced. Based on these, further charges were laid, including 5 counts of indecent assault, 2 counts of installing a hidden camera, and murder. The investigation revealed that the suspect had an abnormal sexual interest in his wife's young niece. When Derek Barrett's cell phone was seized and handed over to experts for analysis and recovery of previously deleted data, the files found on the phone left no doubt that he was not only involved in Michelle's death, but also had an unhealthy interest in her. It turned out that Derek had installed a hidden camera in the shared bathroom, hidden behind toiletry items, and regularly reviewed the recordings. The phone also contained images taken just before Michelle's death. Following these images, it became clear that Michelle had returned home on April 21st around 5 p.m., and around midnight, she sent her last text message from her phone, after which she could not be contacted. Late at night, Derek Barrett began to execute his malicious plan. He entered Michelle's room again while she was asleep to carry out his customary pattern of assault and gratification, but the girl woke up and Derek attacked her. He bound her and covered her mouth with duct tape to keep her silent. The deviant kept her tied to the bed for 2 days and intermittently abused her, as evident from the photographs on his phone. Investigators found Michelle bound, naked, and with a look of horror on her face, lying on the bed. However, in these photos, Michelle did not yet have the injuries that led to her death. Derek's last picture of her was taken around 8 a.m. on April 23rd, and at that time, Michelle was still alive. During the day of April 23rd, Derek's stepson Derek came home twice and did not hear any sounds from Michelle. Derek was taking a shower at the time. Surveillance cameras showed that Derek left the apartment 4 times to take out the trash. Presumably by this time, Michelle was already dead. Derek had showered and washed off any traces of blood, and then thoroughly cleaned the house, hiding evidence of the crime and Michelle's disappearance. On April 24th at 7 a.m., Derek drove to Snapper Point. On the way, he stopped at a gas station where he bought drinks and filled his car with gasoline. That's where he was caught on CCTV cameras. Upon arriving at Snapper Point, he disposed of Michelle's body and took some pictures around 9 a.m. Afterwards, Derek visited his parents, who noticed nothing unusual in his behavior, and then returned home to await his wife's return with absolute equanimity. He repeatedly claimed that he had not seen Michelle and that the girl had not returned home, and cynically accompanied his wife to the police station to file a missing persons report. On June 29, 2016, the first court hearing was held. Barrett's lawyer, Bill Whitby, told the local court that Barrett was pleading not guilty and that he was as shocked and upset by Michelle's death as the rest of the family. Michelle Leng's friends and family were present in the packed courtroom, but Derek Barrett did not need to attend in person. He appeared later via video link. The fact is that the day before, the defendant reported that he did not remember much in the hours before he killed Michelle Leng because he had taken illegal drugs. He also told the court that he had only vague memories of the 2-hour trip to Snapper Point, where he threw Michelle Leng's body off the cliff. Before attending the court hearing, Derek Barrett was examined by a psychologist. However, forensic psychologist Dr. Richard First disputed the defendant's claims of memory loss. He testified and found Derek Barrett mentally fit to be punished to the full extent of his sentence. Dr. First testified that the drugs the suspect was taking did not cause memory loss, and that all of his actions, from the murder to the disposal of the body, were clear and purposeful. Respected forensic psychiatrist Dr. Richard First also stated that Derek Barrett's intelligence, concentration, and memory were within the normal range. He did not believe Barrett's claims of memory loss and said the number of stab wounds indicated sadistic tendencies rather than memory lapses or acting on emotions. The psychologist also rejected Derek Barrett's claim that he did not feel sexually attracted to the victim. Dr. Richard First also told the court that the accused feigned amnesia to reduce his responsibility for the crime, after he claimed he could not remember the period when he apprehended and killed Michelle Leng. Speaking at the trial, Derek Barrett attempted to justify his crime by claiming he was addicted to illegal drugs. However, this assertion was refuted by Dr. Richard First, who pointed out that Derek's claim was self-contradictory, as it was evident that the suspect had gained weight during that time period. Judge Wilson stated that in his 30-year career as a criminal defense attorney, he had never encountered an obese, substance-dependent individual. Regrettably, there was nothing genuine about Derek Barrett's behavior in the courtroom. In Sydney, Derek Barrett's demeanor in court gave the impression of a psychopath. His crime was not the result of a drunken night, poor life choices, or childhood abuse. In August, at a retrial hearing, Derek Barrett pleaded guilty to murdering and kidnapping Michelle Leng, as well as twice sneaking into her room while she slept and making videos. He also admitted taking 19 explicit photos of Michelle Leng shortly before her death. Barrett said he could not remember the 48-hour period during which he killed the girl, including cleaning up the crime scene and dumping her body, because he was under the influence of illegal substances. He said his only memories were of an argument, blood in the bathroom, and the terrified face of his niece screaming at him. However, Judge Wilson said she did not believe Derek Barrett was telling the truth about his memory loss, nor did she believe he was truly sorry for what he had done. The Leng family consoled each other while Derek Barrett wiped away tears, telling them, "I deserve to live. This should never have happened." Passing sentence, Judge Helen Wilson condemned Derek Barrett's actions as depraved and sadistic, committed by a person in a position of trust. The judge detailed Barrett's disturbing fantasies and actions in court, making it clear that he had failed to fool anyone. Although the events were deeply etched in his mind, Barrett claimed they were merely vague memories. During the court sessions, Barrett showed no emotion and repeatedly spoke the victim's name. Chief Inspector Gary Jubilin of the NSW Police Homicide Unit stated that the crime was horrific and senseless, and while justice was served, there was no joy in such a case. Judge Wilson sentenced 28-year-old Barrett to 34 years and 6 months in prison, with a maximum term of 46 years. He will be eligible for parole in 2050. Barrett displayed no emotional reaction when sentenced. Michelle's mother, Mrs. Zhang, expressed gratitude to the Australian and Chinese communities for their support during her time of immense grief. She also thanked the NSW police, including Detective Inspector Jubilin, for their investigation into her daughter's death. A fund has been established to cover the costs of Miss Leng's funeral and to provide support for her mother when she returns to China. However, Michelle Leng's tragic story did not end there. 4 years after the crime, an unexpected event occurred. A woman visiting her elderly, dementia-affected mother found an unknown USB device in the mother's hands. Upon examination, the device contained disturbing videos and photos of Michelle Leng's abuse shortly before her murder. The police were able to match the photos to those that Derek Barrett had deleted from his phone in an attempt to conceal his crimes. In 2020, Barrett was charged with additional sex offenses based on this new evidence. Prosecutor Hugh Baker told the court that the elderly woman had no connection to Barrett, and there was no explanation for how the USB drive ended up in her possession. The horrifying and depraved secret, discovered by chance, led to Barrett receiving additional years of punishment to his already lengthy sentence. Friends and acquaintances commemorated Michelle Leng on Chinese and Australian social media. This tragic story underscores the need to address the underlying factors that can contribute to such crimes, such as idleness, lack of purpose, and indifference. Cherishing life and being mindful of each day is crucial, as we can never predict which day will be our last.
911, where's your emergency?
Someone is a robber at a pawn shop.
Someone's robbing the pawn shop?
And my parents got shot.
Where is the robber?
He's right here right now.
Where are your parents?
They're dead on the ground. Come here quickly because I'm afraid.
The police immediately rushed to the scene of the crime, hoping to save 9-year-old Andrew and his 14-month-old sister, Naomi. An unknown man had committed a ruthless attack on the priest and his family. Leaving no traces behind, the criminal made it one of the detectives' most challenging cases in the detectives' careers. Fortunately, they managed to find witnesses who had seen everything. Their testimonies helped uncover the truth about what had really happened to the Hawkinsmith family. In 2013, in Danville, Kentucky, 35-year-old priest Michael Hawkinsmith, who had previously worked as a manager at a local pawn shop, had to take full control of the pawn shop due to the former owner's health condition. As a former priest, Michael had always been honest with people. He easily found common ground with others and was always willing to help. When he decided to get married, no one doubted his choice. Angie was his first love, and everyone saw her as a very sweet and kind girl. Michael literally worshipped the ground she walked on. When the couple had children, their relationship became even stronger. Together, they were a very happy family. As the Hawkinsmith family expanded, so did their business. The pawn shop, ABC Gold, Games and More, became a successful family venture, attracting regular customers like broker Dan Smith, with whom they often conducted business on Fridays. Life seemed perfect for the Hawkinsmiths until one day in 2013, when an unknown man decided to disrupt their peaceful existence.
911, where's your emergency?
Someone is a robber at a pawn shop.
Someone's robbing the pawn shop?
And my parents got shot.
Where is the robber?
He's right here right now.
The robber, does he have a gun?
Yes. He shot my parents.
Okay, can he see you?
I'm in the back right now.
You're in the back? So the robber's up front of the store?
Yes, but I don't know if he's here or not. But come quickly.
Where are your parents?
They're dead on the ground. Come here quickly because I'm afraid. Please hurry.
Okay, they're coming, okay?
6 minutes after the phone call, police officers arrived at the scene of the crime. When they entered the building, their attention was immediately drawn to a large, bloody trail, which led them to Michael Hawkinsmith. Moments later, they found his 38-year-old wife, Angie, and on the other side of the counter, they discovered the third victim of the crime, 60-year-old broker Dan Smith. All three victims had gunshot wounds to the head and torso. A few minutes later, officers found Andrew Hawkinsmith and his little sister Naomi hiding in a closet. The officers' accounts indicated the unimaginable horror these young children had endured. Suddenly, the 9-year-old boy and his 14-month-old sister were left orphaned, having lost both parents. Upon examining the crime scene, police found 14 spent .22 caliber shell casings and 3 intact bullets, along with a briefcase that belonged to Dan Smith. The victim's personal belongings and all the cash in the register were left untouched, suggesting that robbery was not the motive for the crime. Unfortunately, there were no surveillance cameras in the pawn shop, posing a significant obstacle to the investigation. The police had no choice but to rely on finding potential witnesses to the crime. An employee of the nearby Rainbow Cleaners was able to describe a car that had parked near the building that morning. It was a silver minivan, driven by a large man with a thick beard. While one group of investigators searched the surrounding area, Another informed the closest relatives about the tragedy that had befallen their loved ones. Michael's parents found it difficult to accept the circumstances that someone in their right mind could wish harm to their children. Nevertheless, they tried to find any positive aspect in the situation, and the fact that their grandchildren had survived could not but rejoice them.
If it hadn't been for Andrew and Naomi, I think it was Smith.
Soon, the tragic news reached the daughter of the third victim, Dan Smith. He was involved in buying precious metals and skillfully adapted to the specifics of his work, easily finding common ground with different people. His business involved handling large sums of cash, sometimes exceeding hundreds of thousands of dollars. This led the police to consider the theory that Dan Smith himself could have been the primary target of the criminal. Tracking the man's movements revealed that before he arrived at the ABC Gold, Games and More pawn shop, he had visited Lawson's jewelry store in Harrodsburg, located 10 miles northeast of Danville. In the jewelry store, investigators found a surveillance camera positioned on the far wall to capture every visitor entering and exiting the store. They hoped that the recording would help them determine if anyone had been following Dan Smith. Smith entered the store at 8:16 in the morning, and there were no other customers in the building at the time. He was carrying the same briefcase that was later found at the ABC Gold, Games and More pawn shop. After greeting the woman behind the counter with a smile, headed to the back of the store. Sometime later, Dan Smith reappeared on the footage, coming out from the back of the store, saying something to an elderly woman who had just entered, and then immediately leaving. It was a typical day in the life of the jewelry store. The external camera recording showed nothing suspicious. The police were left to helplessly monitor the man who had no idea he would soon be at the center of a tragic event. Meanwhile, 9-year-old Andrew Hockensmith was taken to the police station to give his testimony. Andrew described how he had been at the pawn shop with his parents when Dan Smith arrived carrying a bag full of money. While his father and Dan were talking, the stranger entered and immediately demanded the bag. According to the boy, Dan Smith immediately handed over his briefcase, after which the stranger shot him. "My father asked him to stop, but he also shot him with a pistol similar to the one I play with," Andrew said. Meanwhile, the mother instructed Andrew to take Naomi to the back of the store and hide in the closet. Andrew took his little sister and hid. It was then that the criminal aimed the gun at Angie. "I don't know who he is and why he did it, but it seems to me that the reason was money," the 9-year-old boy concluded. He described the stranger as a very tall man with a blonde beard that looked fake, matching the description provided by a witness from Rainbow Cleaners. To follow all possible leads, the police's next step was to thoroughly examine the business run by the Hockensmith family. It turned out that the ABC Gold, Games and More pawn shop had another owner, Steve Devine. While he usually attended Friday deals with Dan Smith, he was absent on the tragic morning of September 20th. This information raised concerns, making determining his whereabouts a top priority. Steve Devine explained that he had developed an allergy that morning and was forced to cancel all his appointments, a story confirmed by his wife. The alibi and the fact that Steve Devine did not own a silver minivan helped to rule him out as a suspect. He also explained why there were no surveillance cameras in the pawn shop. According to him, the security system had been removed by the previous owner, Kenneth Allen Keith, and the new owners had not yet installed a replacement. 48-year-old Keith, like his deceased friend Michael Hockensmith, was a priest. Pastor Keith sold the pawn shop when he was diagnosed with brain cancer, but he remained the owner of another similar establishment, Gold Rush Buyers, in Pulaski County, neighboring Danville's Boyle County. Michael's family revealed that he prayed for his friend every evening, hoping for his recovery. Their friendship, which began when Michael worked at a youth church camp, had lasted for 15 years. The Hawkinsmith family always held Pastor Keith in high regard, and for their son Andrew, he was like a beloved uncle. With no significant leads, investigators decided to try their luck in finding possible street surveillance systems near the ABC Gold, Games and More pawn shop. They found a camera on the office building of the real estate office, Danville Rentals. The surveillance footage captured a silver minivan at 8:45 in the morning, but the image was too blurry to identify the license plate or the make of the vehicle. Once again, the police had to rely on the witness's testimony from Rainbow Cleaners, which described the car as an old model with a distinctive square body shape. The car in the video clearly showed a square rear bumper that matched this description. The color, type, and shape of the car all indicated that the police had found the criminal's vehicle. They continued to search for surveillance systems farther and farther from the pawn shop. At 8:17 in the morning, the camera at the local Ephraim McDowell Hospital captured the same vehicle. And finally, investigators were able to determine that it was a silver Dodge minivan. Michael and Angela's family organized a candlelight vigil in their memory. Hundreds of compassionate people attended that evening, demonstrating the depth of love for their lost ones. Similarly, like the Hawkinsmith family, Dan Smith's close relatives were outraged that the whims of another had led to the loss of their loved one. Despite their grief, they chose not to let anger overshadow their other emotions and joined in the funeral proceedings. Meanwhile, the Danville Police Department appealed to the public for any information about the criminal or his vehicle. Immediately after this, on September 24th, the police received a call from Tracy Harold, a pastor in Warren, Michigan. He claimed to be a friend of Kenneth Keith and mentioned that during their last conversation, they touched on the topic of the murder in Danville, and at that moment, Mr. Keith seemed to change. Pastor Kenneth Allen informed his friend that on that particular day, he was driving to Danville for medicine for his wife. He also expressed a sense of guilt for what happened, as he had given Michael Hawkinsmith the opportunity to become the owner of his former business. Keith put forward the theory that Dan Smith himself could have been the main target of the attacker. Keith explained that Dan would come to him every Sunday to pawn all his gold, always carrying large sums of cash with him. Keith speculated that someone might have tracked Dan's route and ultimately targeted him, but there was more to the story. As it turned out, the pastor's relationship with the Hawkinsmith family was not as everyone had believed.
Between you and me, brother, they were crooked people. They went into it with the whole point from day one to take over that business from me.
These words raised suspicions, leading to Pastor Keith being added to the list of suspects. To verify his alibi, investigators decided to review the surveillance footage from the Good Neighbor Pharmacy, where, according to the pastor, he bought medicine for his wife. At 9:24 in the morning, a man entered the pharmacy, indeed Pastor Kenneth Allen Keith, but he looked nothing like the man who had committed the triple attack just minutes earlier. He was not wearing a green jacket or a beard, which were distinctive features of the assailant. However, this did not rule out his involvement in the attack. There was a 7-minute gap between Andrew Hawkinsmith's call to the police and the pastor's arrival at the pharmacy. The police decided to check if it was possible to travel from the crime scene to the Good Neighbor Pharmacy in such a short time. They found that the trip took about 5 minutes in total, so it was plausible to commit the murders, quickly get into a car, and reach the pharmacy to establish a solid alibi. The key clue was that Pastor Keith had an unregistered 2008 Dodge minivan, which was silver. However, all the evidence found was circumstantial, and it was not enough for an arrest. So, investigators turned to Tracy Harold to participate in a series of fake phone calls aimed at the suspect. Luckily, Tracy agreed. During these calls, Pastor Keith finally revealed his true feelings towards the Hawkinsmith family.
When somebody's being murdered in such a heinous way as what this was, you want to make them, out to be saints. I understand that. Mm-hmm. But between you and me, brother, they were crooked people.
Is that right?
They went into it with the whole point from day one to take over that business from me. I don't mean to speak ill.
No, hey.
Facts are facts.
Yeah.
And here's the thing. I can't tell nobody none of this because what does it make me look?
Yeah.
It makes me look like a perpetrator, see?
And then, what everyone had been waiting for happened. Keith began discussing details of the case that had not been made public. I would be but I was at the party. Following that, Pastor Kenneth Keith explained that he left Danville and returned to Somerset. He then took his car to the car wash to prepare it for a planned family vacation. At 10:50 in the morning, Keith was seen on camera walking down the hallway to the cashier's counter with a noticeable smile. It seemed clear that he was not involved in the dreadful crime that occurred earlier that morning. The external camera footage covering the parking lot showed Pastor Kenneth leaving the car wash in the same silver Dodge at 11:25, matching all the images previously obtained from various surveillance systems in Danville. At that point, they had enough evidence to arrest the suspect. He was offered a polygraph test to prove or alleviate his involvement in the pawn shop crime, but his response was rather unusual. Keith stated that he would not be able to pass the polygraph successfully because during his military service, he was tasked with eliminating 3 individuals. The investigators obtained a warrant to search Kenneth Allen Keith's pawn shop, where they discovered a fake beard and a significant amount of cash. The police could not find any legitimate explanation for how he acquired most of the money. They also found bundles of bills wrapped in a ribbon with the name of the bank that issued them, revealing Dan Smith as their client. Further investigation revealed that the money found in Keith's pawn shop had recently been withdrawn from the account of a dead broker. Additionally, several .22 caliber casings were found in Keith's pawn shop. According to ballistics analysis, they were fired from the same weapon used to shoot the parents of young Andrew and Naomi. Based on all the evidence found, Kenneth Allen Keith was charged with 3 counts of deliberate homicide and first-degree robbery. It turned out that Pastor Keith believed that Michael Hockensmith and Steve Devine had conspired to get rid of him from the business. Knowing that Dan Smith carried large sums of money, Keith decided to exact his revenge on the day of their planned meeting at the pawn shop. Keith aimed to mislead law enforcement into thinking the crime was motivated by robbery. In reality, Michael Hockensmith and his partner Steve Devine had no involvement in the imagined conspiracy against Keith. During the investigation, no evidence of discreditable activities by Michael Hockensmith and Steve Devine was found. On September 20th, the criminal arrived in Danville in his silver Dodge Caravan. He circled the pawn shop for a while until he noticed Dan Smith's car parked nearby. The first victim was the broker himself, followed by Michael and then Angela Hockensmith. The pastor then took all the cash from Dan Smith's case and calmly left the crime scene, stopping at the Good Neighbor Pharmacy to be captured on its surveillance cameras and secure an alibi. His decision to go to the car wash was another attempt to remove traces and destroy any evidence that might have been left on his vehicle. In 2017, just before the trial, Kenneth Allen Keith pleaded guilty to all charges. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Before the trial, investigators obtained medical documents from the Veterans Hospital and discovered that the pastor had never had a brain tumor. How could someone who seemed so spiritually inclined commit such a heinous crime? Furthermore, how was he going to live with the knowledge of what he had done?